The story started in the middle of a battlefield, within a trench, with various soldiers fighting, others wounded, and others desperately asking for water, while our protagonist watched the scene silently. Shortly after, various soldiers charged, and the massacre resumed, making our protagonist feel terrible. At that moment, our protagonist introduced herself as Touri Noel, a medic. She then said that, in her previous life, she was a male gamer living in Japan, but she was reincarnated as a girl in a different world. She then recalled that in the game world, as long as she wielded a gun, she was without peer. However, seeing so many gore scenes happening right before her eyes was simply overwhelming for her, and she had to admit that what she was living at that moment was quite different from what she was told. Right after, a young man pulled her out of her reverie by reminding her that she shouldn't space out and that she should follow him properly. She then thought that what she was living was not a game since there were no restarts, and the sprayed blood stubbornly clung to you, and above all, lives were being lost. Immediately thereafter, the young man began to attack the enemy soldiers without mercy, while telling them that he would give them a taste of the voice of his partner, and by partner, he meant his sword. On the other hand, our protagonist, who looked like a young girl, kept running through the battlefield while carrying a huge backpack that looked pretty heavy. Unfortunately, she tripped over a corpse and fell, hitting her face in the process. Almost immediately, an enemy soldier attacked her, but the young man from before saved her by kicking the soldier while scolding the enemy for ignoring him and focusing on the medic bait instead. Shortly after, he killed the soldier and complained because he didn't want to dirty his blade by killing trash like him, not to mention that his uniform got stained. Right after, she ordered our protagonist to stand up before calling her a waste of space and telling her that they were done for that day. The young girl quickly apologized while trying to stand up, and it was then that she really noticed the magnitude of the massacre. That day, their country's border went forward for 58 meters or 325.84 bananas, and 800 fellow soldiers had died for it. At that moment, her thoughts were interrupted again by the young man, who told her that they had achieved a big victory, and she quickly and sarcastically congratulated him. However, he didn't notice her sarcasm and said that it had been good for her that he was the commander for her first battle. Right after, he told her that he would put her life to efficient use with all his might, so she should be glad and die without regrets. Our protagonist then replied that for the country, she intended to play her role splendidly, and the young man said that if she died, he would be sure to tell her heroic tale of how she had become a 1-meter-long part of the country's border to her family. She thanked him for that, again sarcastically, while thinking that both her father and mother had died in an explosion, and that the whole thing was simply madness. That night, the army was having dinner at its camp, and our protagonist thought that the food tasted of blood. But even that thought was interrupted by the young man, who called her. By the way, thanks to that, we learned that she is a second-class medic. Now, putting that aside, is this guy droopy or what? He seems to know when Touri is thinking, and to have a fetish for interrupting her. The young man wanted to confirm if Touri could use healing magic, and the young girl replied that she could, but almost immediately changed her answer, and said that she couldn't, which pissed the other off a lot. The young man then asked her what she could do, and she thought that she was going to be killed. Still, she came clean and said that she couldn't do anything before explaining that, after her aptitude for healing magic was discovered, she had applied for the army, where she was told to learn it on her own. Damn, they are really scraping the bottom of the barrel. The young man truly didn't know whether to laugh or cry at that point, but he managed to ask her why she was even there, and she thought that she couldn't say that she didn't have any choice, or else he would hit her. She also thought that she wanted to repay someone's kindness, and recalled that she was raised in the Noel orphanage until she was 15, in place of both her parents, who had died in the war. So, even if she died by joining the army, she could contribute to the orphanage with money to the bereaved family for recognition of service. Also, her childhood friend, Bernie Noel, wanted to become an officer and show her his cool uniform. They had grown up together, almost like real siblings, and since in her previous life, she had a gaming talent, she was confident that she would become a brilliant soldier. Unfortunately, on his first day after the assignment, the enemy launched a surprise attack in which her childhood friend was burned to death. Back to reality, Touri replied that even if she couldn't do anything, she still wanted to serve his country. Sadly, in the end, she was still hit while the young man called her a cocky brat. Right after, he told her that her attitude was worthy of an adult though. Moreover, while she was trying to fix her bleeding nose, he added that he would introduce her to the veteran medic, so she would get her skills up to par quickly. Sometime later, they were walking while trying to avoid the corpses on the ground, and Touri thought that the world was cruel. Because with all the fantasy elements there, she had thought it would be a world where wars were fought more peacefully. However, there were no heroes or dragons, and only humans waged bloody wars between themselves. In the end, even in a fantasy world, the war was a filthy and muddy affair. Shortly after, they arrived at a yard where there were several soldiers badly wounded, some of them with limbs missing, and he told her not to stop since that was the black tag yard. In a situation where medical supplies were limited during a disaster or war, based on the severity of the wounds and urgency, the patients were prioritized and sorted. Red tag meant patients who needed immediate treatment. Yellow tag meant patients with stable vitals who could be quarantined, and green tag meant patients with light wounds. It didn't take too long for Touri to figure out what black tag meant, and she quickly felt like throwing up. The young man noticed that and teased her, saying that she had a good upbringing for someone who had been raised in an orphanage. Finally, they entered a tent and were welcomed by a female doctor whose name was Gale and who was the head medic. Right after, the young man, whose name was Garbak, apologized to Gale and told her that he had a newbie for training. Almost immediately, he kicked Touri and told her to go learn, which of course, Gale didn't like. Touri then introduced herself as a second-class medic, but before she could finish, Gale interrupted her to heal her face. Right after, the head medic introduced herself and gave our protagonist her condolences. Afterward, Gale was treating some patients while explaining to Touri that Garbak was brilliant during assaults. In fact, he was that spirited when killing enemies that he was not even afraid of his death. Moreover, he was even willing to use his subordinates as a shield without remorse. She told that last part, showing an angry expression, right after a patient thanked her for treating him. Gale, who was also a second lieutenant, then told our protagonist that Garbak went as far as to say that his subordinates' deaths were a lot less damaging than his own, which was why she had given Touri her condolences. After all, Gale thought that Touri had been unlucky to be assigned to his unit despite being a newbie. As for our protagonist, she thought that his superior officer was the embodiment of a hard driver. She then thought that she couldn't help but be angry at herself for volunteering. She regretted not having fled despite shame and reputation. Still, if she were going to die anyway, she wanted to do that, following a fool's order to the T. Right after, Gale told her that Garbak mercilessly killed anyone who disobeyed the orders, which was something Touri should bear in mind. The head medic didn't know if that was any consolation, but she said it anyway. As for our protagonist, she quickly replied that she would take the advice to heart. Almost immediately, Gale told her to try her best to live longer, and Touri thought that the head medic was no better. Sometime later, Gale asked our protagonist to treat some patients, and she began to diligently do it, while the head medic told her that the patient she was treating at that moment was perfect for training in healing magic. In fact, she added that she would let that lightly injured person be Touri's experimental subject, which the man in question found mean. Our protagonist then thought that the wound of the man was a light one. After all, compared to dying, it was a scratch. Right after, she cast a healing spell, and Gale quickly praised her, saying that she was good and that she had talent, which made the head medic think that it was a shame that our protagonist was serving that fool. Afterward, Gale congratulated Touri and told her that, from that moment onward, she was officially a medic. Right after, our protagonist thanked her and thought that she had gotten a new armband, although she couldn't use heal more than twice. At that moment, Gale told Touri that she was going to teach our protagonist magic for summoning a shield. That caught our protagonist's attention, and the head medic explained that it deployed a wall made of mana before casting the shield in front of her. Touri began to touch it, and said that it was somewhat hard like glass, and the head medic told her that it could help her in a dire situation. Not only her, but her comrades too. After hearing that, Touri began to think that her survival rate had increased. But Gale burst her bubble by saying that the shield couldn't defend her against a gun or middle-tier magic. In short, Touri could only use the shield against weak attack magic, arrows, or throwing weapons, and, in the end, our protagonist thought that it was still better than nothing. Gale then told her that, in all honesty, that spell was a perfect fit for a tank role, which was essential for working with Garbak. Afterward, Gale told Touri that she really wanted our protagonist to continue working there with her, but she knew that there was nothing she could do, so the head medic simply told Touri to take care. What our protagonist didn't know at that moment was that the real madness had yet to begin in earnest. A couple of days later, Garbak began to wake up his subordinates by yelling at them, insulting them, and kicking them out of their beds. At that moment, Touri thought that her body hurt and that it was very cold, while a young boy told the commander that he was very mean. Obviously, Garbak was not happy after hearing that and began to punish the boy, whose name was Salsa, while the recently recruited newbie soldier, who was the same age as Touri, began to apologize. While seeing the scene and grabbing her backpack, our protagonist wondered why Salsa had set himself up for a fall. Shortly after, Garbak announced to his platoon that, from that moment onward, they would be infiltrating enemy territory. He then ordered them to get ready on the double. Right after, a soldier called Maru reported that his senior infantry detachment with 3 others had finished their preparations. Almost immediately, a soldier called Alan reported that his recon squad with 2 others had also finished their preparations. Then, both 2nd Class Private Salsa and 2nd Class Medic Touri reported that they had also finished their preparations. After hearing that, Garbak informed that Maru's unit would go first and Alan's unit would stand by beside the commander. Regarding Touri and Salsa, they would follow right behind Garbak. After hearing that, our protagonist obeyed, but Salsa began complaining again, which triggered the demon within the commander. Almost immediately, Garbak lifted Salsa by grabbing the young boy by the collar and asking him if he was a spy, since he wanted to be told important military information beforehand. At that moment, Salsa realized he was screwed and began to apologize while getting beaten. In the meantime, our protagonist thought that Salsa seemed to be a person who wouldn't live to see the other day after the battle. Although she then admitted that she was not in a position to talk about others. Our protagonist recalled a story he had heard from the older medic about how the whole area in the vicinity of the Tar River was once covered in fresh meadows and vast and soft brown-colored earth. However, at that moment, that place had almost been filled with black soil. The reason for it was that the iron, within the blood, had thoroughly blackened the ground, and that blood that continued to be spilled flew in amounts that were enough to change the landscape. She then wondered if the ground under her feet might have contained a part of someone's dearest family lying there, before thinking that she didn't want to die in that miserable place. She didn't have the intention to be the iron that moistened the soil. So, with all her heart, that day, she desperately continued to chase after their platoon commander. Suddenly, Garbak ordered his platoon to stop and get down. They then looked at a nearby fortress, and after various explosions occurred inside, the commander praised the magic squad before adding that there was almost no work left for them. At that moment, our protagonist, who was watching everything using her binoculars, said that meteors were raining there. She then thought that what they were seeing was a common tactic in that world. First, the magic squad bombarded the enemy positions with long-range attacks, burning them, followed by the infantry cleaning up the stragglers. She then added that the archmages were very cool, and Salsa began to ask her to let him see the scene. Nevertheless, before she could reply, Garbak hit the young boy, while saying that, even though it was frustrating, they had the leading role in a war, compared to them, who desperately tried to cut the heads of the rushing enemies. Garbak then added that they, with those sneaky magic attacks from afar, could expand occupied territory more with less damage. At that moment, Salsa said that he had an idea, and the commander told him that he wanted to hear it. Salsa quickly said that they should just have the magic squads bombard the enemies to Kingdom Come, and even Touri wondered out loud why they didn't do that. Almost immediately, the commander hit the young boy again, while explaining that the magic squad used up a lot of magic stones for it. So no amount of budget was going to be enough. Moreover, they would suffer heavy losses because the places for their attacks were predicted and used up for naught. In short, without definitive proof of the enemy's presence, Those attacks were pointless. The commander then said that the moment the bombardment ended, it was their cue, before explaining that their platoon's current objective was to advance to the riverbank and ordering his troops to destroy those loyal mutts of the rotten and corrupt invaders. However, there was nobody there when they charged in. Not even a single corpse was there, just an empty scorched position. The commander began to wonder what was happening and told his men to stand by where they were standing. However, Salsa disobeyed the order, saying he had found something good. Garbak quickly yelled at him that he shouldn't carelessly move there, because it was a trap. Unfortunately, it was too late, and the young boy triggered a stationary-type magic circle that created a huge flame that began to burn him alive. Our protagonist called Salsa to no avail, and the commander ordered his troops to retreat since the enemy had read their strategy, and they were going to bomb that position soon, which obviously annoyed the man. Nevertheless, Touri reminded Garbak of Salsa, and the commander simply replied that she should let that idiot burn to death for all he was worth, before ordering to retreat without dawdling. Meanwhile, Salsa kept screaming, moving around, and asking for help. After noticing his movements, Touri yelled at him that he shouldn't move, because he would trigger another magic circle. However, he only replied that it was too hot. Our protagonist then told him to try rolling on the ground and covering himself with dirt, since that would douse the flames. Sadly, he wouldn't listen and simply begged her to get the pain off of him, which made Touri recall her friend, Bernie, since she guessed that he had died just like that. Outside the fortress, a soldier reported to Garbak that second-class medic Touri was not with them, which shocked the commander. Back with our protagonist, she decided to jump toward Salsa to make him roll on the ground. Luckily, that worked, but Salsa ended up almost unconscious, and Touri kept telling him that he needed to stand up because they needed to run. He then told her that he couldn't move one of his legs, and she replied that she would check the wound before asking him to stay still. She then used her scissors to cut Salsa's pants and quickly noticed that he had an awful burn on that leg. The young boy kept telling her that it hurt very much, and our protagonist replied that she was going to help him, so he should give her a second. In the meantime, Touri thought that she would be using healing magic for the first time in a real-life situation, which was scary. Still, she focused and used the spell twice while begging that it worked. Fortunately, the spell worked, and Salsa quickly told her that she was great and that what she had done was just cool. The young boy kept praising her, saying that medics were amazing, but she was still not confident in her own skills and asked him if he was feeling a little better. Is she deaf or what? He just praised her. Salsa then stood up, although it was hard for him to do it, and told her that it still hurt a lot. As for Touri, she simply told him that if he could stand, they should run. She then apologized and explained that if he couldn't still properly run, she didn't have enough stamina to be able to carry him on her back and run. After hearing that, he replied that he understood, before adding that he would run himself. As for Touri, she thought that she hadn't imagined that using the healing magic in succession would make her so frazzled. Shortly after, the place began to be bombarded, and our protagonist told Salsa that they should run to the Allies' position, fully expecting to die, to which he replied that he didn't want to die. They ran like bats out of hell while explosions filled the entire place. They even began to think that they were going to die, and Salsa lamented that he hadn't even repaid his mother with anything for all she had done for him. After hearing that, Touri told him that if he was lively enough to shout, he should keep running, before thinking that every time she took a breath, she tasted blood on her tongue. Moreover, she knew that ordinarily, that amount of movement would make her lose consciousness, so if adrenaline ran out, she would die for sure. She then recalled that she was a god of the FPS games in her past life. He had excellent enemy spotting ability, perfectly trained aiming skill. Moreover, he also had a momentary response in shooting outs thanks to superior reflexes, and, most importantly, he could read the enemy's thoughts. Unfortunately, none of that was even remotely useful, and she guessed that it was probably a punishment for the ignorant him, who felt that through games, he got to know all there was to know about war. At that moment, Salsa interrupted her thoughts by telling her that he could see the encampment, which meant that they just had to run a little more. Sadly, at that moment, she began to lose consciousness while thinking that, in her previous life, he was your typical game addict. Salsa quickly went to help her, but he couldn't make her regain consciousness, nor was he able to carry her. So he ended up crying alongside her. Nevertheless, he was interrupted by a very annoyed Garbak, who ordered him to shut up. Shortly after, an elated Salsa told an unconscious Touri that they had arrived at the camp, and that they were saved, while the commander ordered him to take her with Gale, before beginning to hit the young boy. Meanwhile, Touri thought that in her current life, she still couldn't become anyone. Some time later, Garbak was insulting Touri, and then he asked her why she had used healing magic without his permission, and why she had disobeyed his order to retreat and had gone to save Salsa instead. However, she was still feeling dizzy and simply apologized, but he still hit her on her forehead with his finger while asking her if she liked Salsa, because they were the same age, before asking her if she understood how bothersome all that had happened was. Touri managed to somehow reply that she didn't like Salsa, while thinking that her head didn't work properly. Still, Garbak punched her in the head before explaining to her that it had been by chance that they all had managed to return without enemies attacking. Is he referring to infantry? Because I could swear I saw explosions in the previous panels. After hearing that, Touri admitted that they had been extremely lucky, and almost immediately, Garbak punched her in the belly and asked her what would have happened if he had been unlucky and had gotten bombed. And she, who was late, just happened to stumble upon him. However, before she could reply, he asked her if she thought that she would still have enough mana to heal him. Touri only managed to reply that it was okay, which enraged Garbak even more, causing him to slap our protagonist several times. He then yelled at her that she had exposed his precious life to danger and had gone to save a piece of shit instead. He really was becoming berserk while yelling at her, since he really thought that the only life that mattered was his. Touri then replied that she had no excuse, and Gale finally intervened and told Garbak to stop, before asking him not to make the condition of a just, healed girl worse. The commander then reminded Touri that her healing magic existed solely for him, before asking her if he knew why he had even bothered to procure a medic at all. She obviously didn't know, and he explained, while looking like a madman, that he had done it so he could rush into the enemy's positions deeper and end the war as fast as possible. Okay, I want this person to be removed from the game. If you know what I mean, he needs to go. Finally, he announced that as punishment, there would be no lunch for her that day, and she had to go and stand before his tent until sunset at attention. Wow, he didn't even care that she looked badly hurt. While he was standing before that animal's tent, Salsa approached her and apologized, since he was aware that she was enduring that because of him. This plague should be removed from the game too, before he ends up dragging Touri to the depths of hell. However, our protagonist replied that it had been her fault, since she decided to forego orders and act on her own, so he shouldn't have to feel responsible for that. Still, he told her that if she didn't help him, he would have died for sure. Nevertheless, she reminded him that it would have happened, because the commander had decided to forsake him, so he didn't need to agonize over her punishment. Although she added that he shouldn't forget that he owed her for saving his life. Salsa immediately said that he wouldn't, before adding that she was his goddess. After hearing that, Touri told him that if he gave her some of his dinner, she would consider them even, which made him think that the life debt was very cheap. Still, he understood that without lunch, she should be feeling very hungry, so he would share his dinner with her. Right after, they bid each other goodbye, since she still had to remain standing there until sunset, while he had been called by the commander. After he left, she thought that she shouldn't get too attached to anybody, since they would end up dying soon anyway. However, her thoughts were interrupted when she heard Garbak beating the crap out of Salsa. Okay, I have to agree with Garbak this time. That kid deserved a good beating. Shortly after, Salsa returned, and his face looked like a mess. Touri then asked what he had done, and the other replied that he had forgotten about the midday briefing, which made her think that Salsa was quite a scatterbrain. The young boy then asked her to use healing magic on him, which angered Touri since she was in that state for having done that. Not to mention that she was seriously injured too, and she was forbidden to use her healing magic even on herself. He then dropped the huge bomb. The commander had told him that there would be no dinner for him that day, and she simply wondered out loud in what hell she had been reborn into. Right after, She told him that they should fight to survive there as much as they could, and he replied that he liked the spirited Touri, before agreeing with her. And so, the curtain on the war of another world rose before our protagonist, who didn't have any special powers or cheats. Well, I would say that being able to use healing magic is at least a special power. Some time passed, and our protagonist was somehow still alive, which was truly a feat considering that she had unreliable friends and violence-prone superiors. At that point, someone farting was the least of her problems, and she was facing a lot of troubles, but she still wanted to work hard for the sake of the orphanage she was raised in. She then began to explain the situation on the front at that point. Both their country, the Austin Empire, and the enemy country, the Sabbath Federation, for 10 years straight, had continued to seesaw between offense and defense at the Tar River, which served as the border between those nations. Moreover, at that moment, she was in the most violent front line, nicknamed Western Front, and they had been thrown out of the riverbank, which was now under complete control of the enemy. The place they were at before, which almost killed Salsa, who had fallen victim to a trap, was now being quickly turned into a new enemy's encampment. Finally, the mission at that time was to conduct a surprise attack on the positions at the river and destroy the enemy's position before the encampment was completed. Nevertheless, our protagonist was worried because they had failed once already, and they still wanted them to repeat the same strategy. Still, she didn't have any choice other than to obey. In fact, she was convinced that she was going to die that day. At that moment, her thoughts were interrupted by Garbak, who was yelling at Salsa, who was asleep. Of course, that ended with the commander punching the young boy in his face, while asking him where Salsa's mind was wandering when the commander was doing the briefing. Shortly after, he informed both Salsa and Touri that they would be following Garbak again, before letting Salsa know that he was going to be a meat shield and that he should protect Touri, even if that killed him. However, that order motivated Salsa a lot. He even wanted the commander to confirm it, so he was sure that his duty was to give his all in order to protect our protagonist. As for Touri, she wondered why the young boy was so motivated and why he was so full of spirit and grateful for being treated like a sacrificial pawn, another Japanese dense protagonist. It's just, why do I even bother at this point? Right after, Salsa told her that he had her back and that she only had to worry about running after the commander with all her might, to which Touri replied by agreeing while thinking that if her bodyguard was so energetic, that was all the better for her. Shortly after, they arrived near the place they had to attack and stopped. Garbak then told them that, first, the magic squad would bomb the position all at once. After that, the infantry would charge. He then added that he would teach his studious pupil, meaning Touri, what the goal of their fight there was, which caught our protagonist's attention, since she didn't think there was a goal in the first place. The commander then explained that, even though the magician squad had done their work, they couldn't slaughter every enemy soldier hiding in trenches with their bombardment. After all, they had defense spells and anti-bombing equipment, which they had desperately used to survive. Furthermore, since the enemy knew that after the bombardment, Garbak's troops would be attacking next, they were just waiting to kill our protagonist and all her comrades. In short, the defending side had an absolute advantage. Garbak kept explaining that the ones under siege would always beat the ones attacking. Moreover, even if they were defeated and retreating, they would just find a new hole to hide in and take an even more solid position, which was what made trench warfare perpetual. Sadly, at that moment, that type of fighting was the mainstream one, and the commander asked Touri why she thought that was the case. To which she replied that it was because of gunpowder's existence, which the man confirmed. With the advent of guns and other weapons using it, they had dirt-smeared killing of each other conducted not only between soldiers but even between civilians. After all, anyone could pull a gun's trigger. Even toddlers would be able to kill enemies if you just gave them one. Our protagonist then asked what the goal of that war was, and the man replied that before everyone died, he would open a path through the front line, which was why the next time she disobeyed his order, he would shoot her then and there. He then ordered her to prepare herself to fulfill her mission, and she obeyed. At that moment, the bombardment began, and Garbak said that the smell of burned flesh reached even the place where they were positioned, before adding that things had gone well that time. Then, he ordered his troops to charge, while telling Touri and Salsa that he was going to show them the way he fought. He was going to turn those foreign pieces of trash into shit-smeared mincemeat. Shortly after, the battle began, and Garbak's troops were welcomed by a rain of gunshots that killed some of them. Nevertheless, that didn't stop the commander, who began to massacre enemies mercilessly with his sword. As for Touri, she kept running right behind him while feeling amazed since her superior was incredibly fast. In fact, his reflexes were so great that he was able to cut the bullets fired at him. That shocked Salsa, who couldn't understand why the bullets didn't hit him. On the other hand, Garbak had unleashed his demon within and was slaughtering the enemies, while telling them to become the nourishment for his beloved blade. Garbak was rushing into an enemy's rain of bullets without any form of support, which was a feature that could only be done by a man wishing for all to end. However, to one's surprise, the safest place on that battlefield could be found right behind the back of the commander. At that moment, Touri finally realized what Garbak was doing, and she told Salsa that the commander was cutting the enemy's bullets, which astonished the young boy. That made our protagonist remember that the world she was living in at that moment was a fantasy one with swords and magic. That fact had slipped her mind after being confronted with days filled with battles reeking of mud and death. Touri's thoughts were interrupted by Salsa, who asked her why the commander was faster than them on his legs, all while slashing at bullets, to which our protagonist replied, looking annoyed, that she had no idea. Salsa and Touri were barely able to follow on behind the commander, who kept annihilating his enemies. At that moment, our protagonist tripped and fell, and Salsa stopped to help her. Almost instantly, Garbak, who was beheading a soldier, insulted them and reminded them that they should follow him if they wanted to live. Seeing the commander with his face covered in blood startled both young kids, and that opening was used by an enemy soldier to attack Touri, who thought that she was going to die since she couldn't react in time. Luckily, Salsa managed to bump the soldier and grab our protagonist's hand in order to run away with her. As for the young girl, she couldn't help but find the young boy dashing at that moment. However, more enemy soldiers appeared behind them, and he began to scream in fright, which made Touri take back her previous words. Fortunately, Garbak managed to return in time and killed all the soldiers with ease. Moreover, when Touri saw the head of one of those soldiers flying and landing on the ground, something triggered within her, and she began to run like there was no tomorrow, leaving Salsa behind without listening to his pleas. Sometime later, a huge pile of corpses could be seen outside the enemy's improvised base, and Touri took advantage of the fact that the commander had stopped to give him advice. If they continued further, coordination with other troops would break down. Garbak didn't understand the meaning of her words at first, but our protagonist then showed him where the friendly troops were, which made the commander realize that they were far away, still taking their sweet time chit-chatting. Still, he knew that they couldn't go any further at that moment, and ordered his troops to gather where they were. Of course, Touri was aware that the issue was that Garbak had been so gung-ho about advancing, but she also knew that it was better to keep that information to herself. At that moment, some soldiers reported that Private First Class Gray had been shot, and the man himself quickly apologized to his commander. Garbak then asked Touri if she could really use healing magic twice, which she confirmed. The commander then told her that he would permit her to give Gray first aid and, if necessary, use healing magic one time, and she immediately obeyed while thinking that it had been the first time she had heard something like that from him. Right after, Garbak dragged Salsa away, while telling him that they would secure the surroundings. As for Touri, she put on a face mask and asked Gray to show her his wound. He obviously agreed and told her that it was amazing to be treated by such a cute medic. After hearing that, Touri couldn't understand why he was saying such words when he was on the verge of death. Still, she told him that he had a hematoma in the gunshot wound, before adding that she would drain the blood, which would be a little painful. He then told her that she shouldn't mind him, and that she should just do what she had to do. However, he still began to feel pain, while she thought that the wound was deeper than she had thought. She then wondered if she was going to be able to stop the bleeding with her unskilled healing. After all, she only had one use, and she wanted to succeed. Immediately thereafter, she informed Gray that the removal of the blood clot was confirmed, and that, From that moment onward, she would apply healing magic. Touri then told herself to be resolute, regulate her breathing, and, carefully, just as the head medic Gale taught her, cast the spell. Shortly after, Salsa and Garbak returned, and the young boy looked elated after seeing our protagonist heal the soldier. After a while, Gray confirmed that he could move his leg, which surprised him, and despite looking terrible, he still smiled at her and thanked her. He even called her little Touri. However, she apologized for not being able to heal it completely with her abilities. Nevertheless, Gray cut her off, saying that even stopping the blood was enough for him. Right after, Touri gave him a thermos and told him that he should quickly ingest the ORS. That was too much for the soldier to handle, and he immediately invited Touri to go on a date with him. Obviously, she ignored him and simply told him that, if in the next 24 hours he noticed hematuria, he should inform her immediately. However, he simply told her that he would have liked her to at least react in some way to his proposal. At that moment, the commander told them that if they were finished, they should go and assist the friendly troops. Nevertheless, he didn't forget to tell Touri that she should go and hide in the trench, to which she agreed. As for Gray, he bid Touri goodbye and left, and at that moment, our protagonist told him that, unless he got shot again, she guaranteed that he would live. Gray then turned around, smiled at her, and replied that he would be careful. Still, Touri wondered how he was going to be careful, being in a place like that. After all, for her, even just breathing was tiring. She then thought that if she let her mind wander, while listening to the sounds of gunshots, she began to have nightmarish visions of lots of skeletons in military uniform walking through the battlefield. While she was seeing those skeletons in her dreams, she was suddenly awoken by a soldier who was announcing that the fight was over. The same man also informed that all soldiers should change places with the units in the rear and ensured that they maintained that position. Touri woke up thinking that the fight had ended before she knew it, and while she was walking to the rear, she met with a soldier from another platoon. But that man looked completely deranged. His face was covered in blood, sweat, and tears, and she couldn't even understand what he was saying. She then decided to keep walking and eventually met with Garbak and the others. Right after, the commander announced that they had obtained a big victory, before adding that in that day's advance of 31 meters, or 174.16 bananas, their platoon had sustained only one casualty, which surprised our protagonist. At that moment, another soldier told the commander that they should at least do something at that moment. Almost immediately, Garbak declared that the life of Scout Lendl had become the foundation of their victory, before adding that those 31 meters afforded to them were the crystallization of his will. Finally, he ordered all his troops to salute in memory of valorous Lendl. After hearing that, our protagonist thought that it was the first time hearing that name. She didn't know what he looked like, what his character was, or where he had lost his life. She didn't know any of that. Shortly after, Garbak said that the ceremony was finished, and the soldiers began to say that they should drink when they returned. In fact, the commander said that he would again take out the ale from the storehouse, and one of the soldiers quickly told him that he was very cool, which Garbak enjoyed a lot. As for Touri, she began to feel nauseous, and she didn't know why. Luckily, Salsa quickly got beside her and asked her if she was okay. She tried to lie, telling him that she was fine, but he noticed that she was shaking hard and suggested that they should take a break for a while. A while later, they were both sitting in front of a campfire, and he asked her why the other soldiers were laughing, and she replied that she believed that they were behaving that way because the tactical objective of that day's battle had been achieved. Salsa then agreed, although he didn't look convinced. Shortly after, Touri told him that they should begin to laugh too, so they could blend with the others. In the end, that was the usual everyday sight there on the battlefield. However, at that moment, Gray appeared behind them and began to shake them while asking them why they were so serious. Is he the Joker or what? He then told them that they shouldn't space out there, before adding that when they handed that place over to the next troops, they would immediately retreat, which was why they should stop being so gloomy. Immediately thereafter, he began to tease Salsa, and shortly after, he started staring at our protagonist, before suddenly saying that little Touri's sad face, when she was so hung up on the death of a comrade, was gorgeous, which left her flabbergasted. Still, she quickly regained her composure and replied that she was ashamed of her own inexperience, and Gray simply told her that he was very jealous of her for being able to make such a face, which was a comment that Salsa didn't particularly like. Shortly after, Gray made himself comfortable and told them that they were all there had already given up on everything. So if they were able to escape from that hell just a step ahead of others, then it was fine. That was what they always thought. He then added that he was sure that Lendl, at that moment, was partaking in a banquet with other fellow soldiers on the other side, and that soon, the kids would be envious of those guys who had died. Finally, he told them that he was sure that such a day would arrive for them in the future. While Gray was talking, Touri saw another nightmarish vision, but that time she was not dreaming, and she didn't see a skeleton, but a dead soldier standing in front of her with his face covered in blood. She tried to tell Gray about it at first, but then she decided to keep quiet while thinking that Gray's smile was so peaceful that you wouldn't think he was in his right mind. At that moment, her thoughts were interrupted by a man who informed them that they should all prepare to retreat. While they were retreating, Salsa told Touri that he didn't get what Gray had told them. He couldn't understand why they were going to be envious of those who had died. After all, he was sure that he didn't want to die. After hearing that, our protagonist simply replied that she agreed with him. Nevertheless, Salsa admitted that if he spent a lot of time on the battlefield, he would also start to think like that, but almost immediately, he began to deny it. At that moment, our protagonist told him that it depended entirely on him, before adding that she was sure that Private First Class Gray was gentle to a fault. She then thought that, after hearing his words, she had felt like she had seen a glimpse of his nature. After hearing that, Salsa asked her how wanting to be saved through death was being gentle, and Touri quickly asked him not to be so loud. She then explained that more than being lost in fear of dying himself, he had simply chosen to believe that the dead comrades were being saved from the world. That was what she believed. Our protagonist then thought that while saying such a thing to them both, he was afraid of it more than anyone else because he had already given up. Upon returning to the base, Commander Garbak held a drinking party, but Salso and Touri went to sleep almost immediately since they were tired. And then, on the gloomy dawn, it began to rain. Almost immediately, a soldier told the others that they should begin to make roofs and get the waterproof sheets, one for every platoon. Shortly after, while carrying those things in the rain, Salsa complained to Gray, asking why they didn't have things such as umbrellas or raincoats, to which the young man replied that the young boy would get it if he got up in the world. Afterward, they kept discussing that the rain was one hell of a hailstorm. The soldiers quickly began to work in the trenches, while they were told that sheets should be placed at an angle, since, if they made them even, the water would accumulate in the middle of them. Moreover, they shouldn't forget about the ditches for draining water. Meanwhile, Gray told Salsa that he was doing a great job before explaining to him that he should fix the sheet with nails at the edges. The rain, the symbol of blessing for crops, for those soldiers who hadn't been able to secure the river, was a chance to replenish their valuable source of drinking water. At that moment, Gray said that it was finally time to take a break. Some time later, Salsa asked Gray if there was no sortie that day, and the young man replied that it was not recommended to fight in the rain since gunpowder would get damp. Of course, Salsa was elated after hearing that, but Gray quickly added that they could still fight using waterproof grenades, swords, bows, and stuff. Nevertheless, those could lose their speed at a distance. Besides, you could slip, so it was not that safe to do it. After hearing that, Touri began to fall asleep while thinking that it would be good if rain continued to fall forever. However, unbeknownst to them, a man was standing nearby while grabbing a spear in his left hand. Moreover, that spear was clearly emitting lightning, and the expression on the man was severe. Shortly after, Salsa and Gray tried to wake Touri up, telling her that she shouldn't sleep because it was dangerous. In fact, the young man tried to give her a smooch, but the young boy quickly stopped it, while another soldier complained about the rain. Salsa then said that when the rain fell, they didn't need to fight, which was a good thing. However, the man who had complained before called the young boy a moron, before adding that the rain was the worst enemy for them. After all, when soldiers went against them, the commander just got a rush into them, and all was well, but with the rain, everything was different. When rain fell, you couldn't do anything. The man then added that before he was transferred there, he had served with the defense squad. A typical assault squad consisted of a foot soldier, a scout, and a grenadier. A scout went first and investigated the state of the enemy soldiers. Then, a grenadier used grenades or small-sized explosives. It was a branch of soldiers with high attacking power. On the other hand, a defense squad was a branch geared for attrition warfare that consisted of an armored soldier, a magician, a medic, and an engineer. An armored soldier was hyper-specialized in enduring enemy attacks on the front lines, and the engineer built defense walls and wire obstructions. The defense squad enjoyed being saddled with the most severe situations out of all the troops. They sat in the frontmost trenches and simply waited for the enemy. That was the most hellish work for a soldier, requiring him to always be prepared to meet an attack and be on the lookout 24/7. For them, it was not possible to get their hands on such luxury items as vinyl sheets, and they often got left out in the elements. Due to that, they lost their body heat, and since the ground was flooded with water, they were always sopping wet with the dirty slop. In his squad, bloody diarrhea was all the rage. Quite a lot of comrades died, one after the other, from dehydration. The man also added that it was truly miserable to die from diarrhea because you got buried in your own filth and became unable to move. Needless to say that the last part made Touri, who had just woken up, feel sick. Still, the man wasn't finished, and he added that even if you wore boots, that made no freaking difference, because when the water level rose, the dirty water mixed with shit would find a way to invade the insides of your footwear. Furthermore, during the winter, the water got cold and freezing, and getting wet from the rain made the toes of your feet prone to necrosis. It was then that Gray finally decided that it had been enough and asked the man, whose name was Alan, to stop. The man complied, but he explained that he had told them that so they understood why rain was so scary, before adding that being in an assault squad was a blessing since you were able to have a roof over your head like that to fight off the rain. Gray then added that, ordinarily, Touri should have been sleeping in a bed in a field hospital. After all, a medic was not a combatant. In fact, Alan admitted that he hadn't ever heard about medics being attached to an assault squad. Salsa then asked why she was there, and Gray explained that the commander was being selfish. That time when he ate a bomb and was forced to retreat due to sustaining an injury, he shouted that if he had had a medic for himself, he would have advanced more. That shocked Salsa because even after catching a bomb with his face, Garback still wanted to go forward. Right after, the young boy and Alan agreed on the fact that the commander was crazy and began to laugh out loud. As for our protagonist, he thought that she should have expected that. In the end, no matter how you looked at it, it was weird to have a medic rushing forth in the front lines. Gray then said that the rainy season was upon them, so the frequency of enemy attacks should decrease. He then advised Salsa to learn whatever he could while he had time to do so. After all, someday, the commander would stop protecting him. He then told him that the first lesson would be how to run while keeping a low profile, which confused the young boy. Alan then explained that if Salsa continued to do it like he was doing it, showing his head to everyone, he would die in minutes. Meanwhile, Touri thought that it was refreshing to listen to the stories of their soldier seniors, as it was a very rare occasion. In the end, like that, little by little, they, who were like young chicks, would eventually become proper soldiers. Unfortunately, they quickly felt the ground shaking, and someone alerted them of an enemy attack before instructing them to take positions. After hearing that, Salsa called Gray a liar, and the other simply laughed and ignored him. A while later, Garback asked Alan what was happening, and the other reported that around 500 meters or 2,809 bananas to the north, at the trenches with friendlies, he could see several fumes from explosions. He then added that he suspected that it was an offense conducted by magicians. He then reported that the enemy assault squads had started to advance, which meant that the first defense line had been broken. Moreover, he added that the second defense line would be broken soon. Obviously, that pissed Garback, who said that they should persevere more and even suggested that their army had only weak-willed cowards left. Nevertheless, Alan said that the squad rushing at their front troops had superb skills, since they went forward at great speed before the other enemies. Garback then asked what their commander looked like, and Alan replied that it was a spear wielder with long blonde hair, wreathed in lightning. After hearing that, Garback smiled since he had recognized who the other person was. He was Sabase, Kamakiri the lightning spear demon. Furthermore, he realized that during that rain, the lightning magic was going to make them its playthings, so they needed to aim at his feet to cut down his mobility. He gave that order to his troops, and added that they needed to draw him near as much as possible, and he would jump in and take his head. Garbak then yelled that it was his lucky day, and our protagonist thought that he was a lunatic. He then reminded Touri to use her healing magic on him in case anything happened to him. Right after, he ordered Maru to get before Kamakiri and buy him time, before adding that Alan had to take him to the trench and keep him safe. Finally, the others should fight the other enemies from the trenches. Regarding Salsa, his mission was the same as before, being Touri's meat shield, which again made the boy feel elated. He then told Touri that he would properly protect her, and Gray began to tease him since he noticed the boy's feelings. However, Salsa quickly explained that he had a debt to repay her for saving his life. Oh, so he doesn't like her. That's interesting. Shortly after, Kamakiri and his troops arrived and the battle began. Of course, Garbak quickly blocked Sabase while thanking him for taking the trouble of going there to die in that rain. An insanely fierce battle started between the two, where both men managed to parry each other's attacks. Nevertheless, Garbak soon found an opening and used his forehead to hit Kamakiri in his forehead, pushing Sabase back. In the meantime, Salsa said that the lightning was a huge problem since the ground conducted it easily. Right after, Gray replied that he should chin up because if the commander died, they would be next. As for Touri, she was focused on the commander, while thinking that if anything happened to him, she would use the healing magic without hesitation. Sadly, at that moment a lightning fell very close and caused some damage to her. So, Gray and Salsa told her to get behind them since it was dangerous otherwise. She then apologized for being careless, and Gray replied that she shouldn't do it. Right after, Salsa added that she had to protect the commander while he would protect her. Back to the battle of commanders, both kept attacking each other, while parrying the attacks aimed at them. However, while Garbak seemed to enjoy the fight, Kamakiri looked very annoyed. Almost immediately, Garbak managed to find another opening and was able to hit Kamakiri hard, to the point of throwing him away. Almost immediately, Gray ordered all the soldiers to shoot Sabase down, and very quickly they managed to injure him in his left ankle. Immediately thereafter, Garbak jumped at the other to land the finishing blow, but Touri noticed that an enemy soldier had fired something at her position. Almost immediately, she recognized that soldier as a grenadier. At that moment, she thought that for the first time, the skills she had learned as a gamer in her previous life had become useful, because while everyone was focused on the commander and Kamakiri, nobody had noticed the grenadier. Sadly, she knew that she wouldn't make it in time. She then recalled what Garbak had told her about using magic without permission, but she dismissed that warning because there was no time to ask for his permission. Right after, she stepped forward, pulled both Gray and Salsa back, and cast a shield in front of them. Almost immediately, the grenade hit the shield and was deflected, but it landed inside the trench. At that moment, they all realized that a hand grenade had been fired at them, and Alan told all the soldiers to get down. However, our protagonist knew that everyone would die at that point, so she shot toward the grenade, praying to be on time. Shortly after, she got close enough and cast another shield to contain the explosion, and almost at the same time, the grenade exploded. Touri groaned in pain, lying in the pile of rubble after the explosion. She started wheezing and coughed up blood as her senses quickly came back to her, and she wondered what had happened. Her mind flashed back, seeing Salsa diving on her and shielding her with his body. While Touri got knocked out, the explosion blew Salsa away. Immediately afterward, she faintly called to him and saw one of her seniors beside his body. She was relieved to see him, and just then, Gray came up behind her, glad to see that she was alive as well. Touri assured him that she was okay since Salsa had shielded her from the blast. She insisted she was all right, but then realized she couldn't stand. Looking at her legs, she was shocked to see the terrible burn wounds. As Gray carried her, she told him to wait, remarking that Salsa's back was still badly burned, and she needed to heal him immediately. With a sad look on his face, Gray told her that it was too late. She wondered what he was talking about. Then, he called to Alan, who was holding Salsa's body. Alan revealed that Salsa's eye was gone, and he was dead. Touri's eyes couldn't believe what she was seeing. She tried calling out, but Salsa just continued bleeding without a single movement from him. And so, Alan decided to put the boy to rest. Touri simply stared, unable to speak as she was carried away by Gray. Her friend was gone. Later on, at the medical facility, a lot of injured bodies lay around, and there were a lot more patients packed inside. The medics struggled to hold down one of the patients, who refused to let his leg be cut off. But there was no other way to save him. Touri was in the room right beside him, hearing as he screamed for the medics to stop. Immediately afterward, Gail came into the room and said she'd heal Touri right away. With the little strength she had, Touri turned to her. Gail then remarked that a burn of this degree was nothing. However, as she used heal again and again, there were no effects. She felt it was because she was just a little winded and needed just one shot of her potion to get back at it. Without finding any in her bag, Gail asked her assistant to pass her one, but he warned that she had already overdosed on it. Regardless, Gail told him to hurry up. Immediately after, she popped open the potapon and gulped down swiftly. She felt like throwing up right after, but after recovering, she was ready to continue the healing process. Immediately afterward, a bright light shone as she cast the healing spell on Touri's legs. Her assistant was amazed by her skills. Then, Gail told him to stop admiring and get to bandaging Touri. She also told our protagonist that she would come check on her later. As Touri thanked her in a faint voice, Gail was called to attend to someone else, and even yelled as they hurried her. The assistant then apologized to Touri, explaining that the whole hospital inside and outside was filled with wounded, teetering on the brink of death. They were out of all types of painkillers across the tents as well. This way, it would be hard for Touri to even get to the toilet like this. As the man wiped her face, he heard someone coming through and wondered if it was the chief, and if she had forgotten something. But it turned out to be Garbak. He told Touri that he had questions she needed to answer for him post-haste, and asked her to come quickly. Touri was still barely conscious and struggled to stand up. The medic assistant protested, explaining that she still urgently needed to rest. However, Garbak yelled for him to shut up, stating that this was a superior officer's order. He then dragged Touri away, while the man called out to Gail. Immediately afterward, Touri staggered outside, and everyone saw she was still bleeding as she followed Garbak. The superior commander then remarked on how she used shield magic earlier on. He reminded her that just the other day, he had asked her what needed to be done before using her magic. Touri confirmed that Garbak ordered her to ask for permission, and when he asked why she neglected to do so, she thought about it momentarily before saying she was incompetent. That was all. Suddenly, her eyes grew wide in fear as Garbak smacked her brutally. The other soldiers were alerted to the beatdown he was dishing out to her recklessly. He landed so many body shots and just wouldn't stop. Touri groaned in pain until she finally fell to the ground. The others were scared she would die. Immediately afterward, Garbak asked Touri what happened to those who violated orders twice, and she replied that they would be sentenced to death. He then remarked that her stupid self actually remembered the instructions he went through the trouble to teach her. With this, he believed that she simply defied him of her own volition. Crying and bleeding out, Touri said she had no excuse. He called her a dimwit and continued beating her up mercilessly, while yelling for her to die. This is the type of behavior that in IRL get commanders terminated by their allies. I really want someone to take out this dude. Garbak also started kicking Touri and said that if she disliked his orders so much, he would grant her where she wouldn't need to be reminded twice of his orders. As he asked her to stand up, one of the soldiers grabbed his shoulder, asking him to stop, but Garbak immediately pointed a sword at the guy and gave him a deadly glance. The soldier didn't understand what his problem was. Then, one of his comrades told him to leave it, because Garbak wasn't an opponent one could easily go against. He was safer not getting involved because Commander Garbak was fearfully called the Sword Demon by Sabbath's men. Seeing who he actually was, the soldiers decided to continue drinking somewhere else. Immediately afterward, Garbak kicked Touri to stand up and picked up some stones. He then told her that he was going to educate her, and he permitted her to use the shield magic. Garbak furiously threw the stones at her, urging her to hurry up. Touri was still far too weak, but he still told her to defend herself. After mustering so much strength to get up, she cast the shield magic. But Garbak shattered it instantly, yelling that she missed a shot and she should stand up quickly. Touri's bleeding only got worse as Garbak yelled at her to ready her shield. With tears in her eyes, she finally realized it was true. If things were like this, she felt it would have been better to die instead. Surviving after being protected by Salsa, and getting beat up while being stared at by everyone. Now, she understood what Gray was getting at when he talked the last time. And then, Touri wondered if what awaited her from now on in life was despair. So, she felt it would be better to end it here and now. Immediately afterward, Garbak told her to use slanting defense, which left her confused. He explained that she needed to put the shield at an oblique angle, and went ahead to demonstrate the ability in front of her. He then asked to try doing the same. As Touri cast the spell, she couldn't get the shape right, and Garbak told her it was wrong. Afterward, he showed her a simpler method by casting the spell on his 2 hands, and she repeated after him. Garbak then joined his hands together, causing the shields to achieve the desired shape. Touri did it and got it well. After seeing how to do it, Garbak picked up more pebbles and told her to prepare herself. He threw the rocks and they bounced off against her shield, going the opposite way. Touri finally understood how this technique was supposed to work. Moreover, Garbak explained that she had to deflect the enemy's attack. It wasn't something she should take head-on. He asked if the head medic, Gale, was the one who taught her how to use the shield magic. After Touri confirmed it, he explained that Gale was a professional medic, but her hands-on knowledge of the Frontlines was subpar. If he were Touri, he'd use this shield technique when faced with a bomb blast, and there would have been a different number of victims. Upon hearing this, Touri's voice trembled as she speculated what could have happened to Salsa. Garbak told her that if she were lucky, she could have saved him. Touri fell to her knees, filled with guilt. If at that time, she made the commander aware of the fact that she could use shield magic, and if she used it properly, then kind-hearted Salsa wouldn't have had to die. Touri was so distraught. She felt like her head was going to split in half, and she cried out loudly. Immediately after, Gale rushed to her and told her to get it together. Her assistant remarked that Touri's state was quite bad. Enraged, she lashed out at Garbak, asking what he was thinking. She was fed up with him, questioning how he could do this to the girl she had healed, putting her life on the line. However, Garbak gave her a sinister look and called her a hypocrite. Gale finally snapped, and she said she would put out a protest against him concerning this case. But Garbak cut her off, telling her to be his guest and feel free. As he stormed out, Touri called to him. She felt it was as if his back was saying, "Feel free to despise me as much as you like. Both enemies and allies, I'll take you all on and drag you all to the depths of hell." That was what she felt then, and Touri thought that someday she would join that line. After that, she silently let go of her grasp on consciousness. The next day, after being healed by Miss Gale, Touri went to do her duty at the field hospital as Commander Garbak ordered her to. She began using her healing magic to tend to the patients. There was also the fact that she was now in such a strained position that there was a need to recruit such an inexperienced, newbie medic such as her. But, as she defied the orders twice already, and moreover, she had a comrade's death on her hands, Garbak probably decided that a careless brat like her would only be a burden to the people on the front lines. Immediately afterward, Gale came to guide her to do the healing carefully and thoroughly. She got excited, seeing how amazing Touri was. Touri's mana was increasing, and in addition, she had dramatically improved her accuracy. Even bearing in mind that she was 15, the rate of our protagonist's growth was astounding. Touri asked if this was really true, and Gale affirmed it. The head medic told her that if she continued like this, in half a year, being an ace wouldn't be out of the question. However, Touri felt she didn't have the leeway to think about such a future. Still, she said she'd put her due diligence into doing so. Immediately after, Gale remarked that it wouldn't be right to hide this from her, so she would say it straight. She told Touri that she would appeal to the higher-ups to have our protagonist transferred into her medical corps. Touri seemed confused, and asked if Gale said that, because she couldn't carry out her duty on the front lines. But Gale replied that it wasn't like that, explaining that it was just recently they had an increase in the number of casualties, especially since they were understaffed as it was. On top of that, she couldn't just sit still and allow a promising rookie to be killed on duty. With dead eyes, Touri just looked at her and said she understood. But Gale still had a concerned look on her face. She then remarked that she had heard the reason Garbak disciplined Touri so harshly was because of the shield magic she had taught her. But Touri argued that what she said was absurd. She believed it was entirely her fault for not properly reporting, and claimed the commander's instruction was extremely valid. Still, Gale said it was all her fault because it was she who pushed for our protagonist to be sent to Garbak's unit. Touri was stunned by this. Gale had judged by her looks that Touri was small, weak, and that if she was about to die, it wouldn't bring any trouble because she was an orphan. This was why she chose her. She had also assumed that the moment our protagonist went out to the front lines, it would spell death for her, who wouldn't be able to do anything. With a sinister look, Gale revealed how she hoped Garbak would have died, spewing blood while being covered in dirt and mud, all the while feeling excruciating pain and agony. After all, that was how her younger brother was killed while serving under the commander. Okay, everyone has a few missing screws on their heads. She clenched her fist furiously, saying Garbak had to get what was coming to him. Even now, she could remember it. That time when she was given her brother's dog tag, with the announcement of his death, she couldn't believe what Garbak had just said. He told Gale that her brother's life had allowed them to advance 15 meters farther, assuming she'd be glad to hear it. But tears rolled down her face in disbelief. He said those exact words to her while smiling. Hearing this, Touri couldn't find the right words to say. Going by what Marie had heard later, due to Garbak's abnormal advance speed, the friendly troops weren't able to catch up to him, and only his unit was able to push forward. But when he was surrounded by enemies on all sides, not being able to do much, he used Gale's brother as bait and escaped that unfavorable situation. Gale then remarked how it made her laugh when thinking of an ace who used the lives of his subordinates to wipe his ass. Immediately after, Touri asked whether the commander didn't stir up a storm about needing to have his own medic. She had heard this from her assault soldier seniors, who were quite astounded then. Gale coldly replied that he was just making a fool out of all of them. She mocked the idea of Garbak killing people when he adamantly asked to be healed the moment he sustained injuries, and questioned who he thought healers were. Still, Gale couldn't go against the orders. With that, Touri figured that was the only way for her to show the most defiance she could muster then. But she insisted that she came here out of her own volition, and wherever she ended up, she would carry out her duty as best as she could. So, she begged Gale, who was in tears, not to blame herself anymore. Touri believed the one who stood before her eyes right now was always the gentle and beautiful Miss Gale. That was what mattered for her. Afterward, Gale remarked that our protagonist's words helped her even if for a moment. Then, she asked Touri to go back to the platoon. She complained that Garbak just couldn't shut up about having Touri back immediately. As our protagonist saluted her and walked off, Gale prayed for her not to die. You know, if we put Touri in Warhammer 40K, she would feel right at home. When Touri went to the back of the field hospital, she saw groups of soldiers with shovels digging up big holes in the ground. It was a usual sight on the front lines. And while she walked by, she was stunned to see a carriage carrying dozens of bodies. Her medic seniors would say that all of them were lucky, since a lot of soldier corpses were left to the elements, where they would slowly decompose into sludge, all the while becoming hotbeds for germ infestation. Being thrown in a hole to be burned to ash was a much better fate. Just then, Touri caught sight of Alan and called him. He took a deep breath, cracking his back before slowly walking over to her. Alan remarked that she looked livelier than he'd have thought. He then asked if she was okay with coming to this place, but she told him that she was returning to the platoon at the very moment. Afterward, she asked what had happened to him. Alan then explained that he was beaten up by the commander, and also prohibited from getting healed. When Touri asked why, he put his shovel down, and she decided to help light his cigarette. After taking a puff, Alan explained that it was because he messed up and let a newbie die. After all, the one who should have noticed that grenade was him. The duty of being alert to the surroundings after the commander deployed was placed on him as a scout. After noticing a grenadier, he had to intercept the enemy with wind magic and prioritize the evacuation of the platoon. It was supposed to be an easy job, and yet, until the moment Touri had recited the defense magic incantation, Alan hadn't noticed a single thing. He felt completely pathetic. Touri comforted him, remarking that it was shot from a considerable distance. What's more, it was positioned in a blind spot for him. Alan chuckled, calling our protagonist a good girl, but she quickly refuted, saying it wasn't true. Yet, Alan told her to be proud. If she hadn't changed the grenade's trajectory in a flash, they all could have perished then and there. He remarked that it was a hell of a strike. And also, Salsa did his thing well too. He then pointed over to the bodies, and Touri saw Salsa's dead body lying in the pile. The cremation was starting, and all she could do was watch silently. Shortly after, Alan plucked a weed from the ground and told Touri to get some too. It was their tribute to the fallen. One of the soldiers there remarked that God once said death was not the end, it was just the beginning. Those souls wouldn't ever want for food or suffer from thirst, and an eternal rest awaited them. While Touri stared at her flower, Alan reminded her of the time she was once saved Salsa, even though that was against the commander's orders. And then, she got beaten up and left without food as punishment. Touri remembered, remarking that it was tough. Alan then commented that she sometimes acted quite foolhardy, like a boy, and he found it shocking. Touri apologized, but he told her that Salsa was saved by her kindness. And he wasn't talking in a literal sense. With a smile, he quoted what Salsa would have told her, saying, "I've repaid my debt to you." Second-class Private Salsa didn't have any significant training, but he was drafted as a foot soldier, thrown onto the front lines, and died on duty after a couple of short weeks. A youngster who only just recently graduated from high school at 18 years old. Dying at such an age, a little bit after living a peaceful school life. Was there a fate more grim than this? Going straight to the point, this kind of tragedy here was a dime a dozen. The soldiers who barely survived earned the right to live their days in this hell. Touri honestly couldn't say which of the outcomes was the better one. As the flames burned Salsa's body, she began crying, and Alan comforted her. Salsa, while being consumed by the flames, absolutely didn't look like he was at peace at all to her. As everyone paid their respects to the heroic fellow soldiers, Touri cried her heart out. Afterward, they observed a moment of silence. Later on, Alan asked her if she was okay returning to the platoon alone. She thanked him for his consideration and assured him that she was all right. Immediately after, she walked past the older soldiers, and they all called out to her, trying to flirt. Those unwitting new recruits were walking to the trenches in high spirits, making merry all the while, as if they went out on a picnic with friends. Touri then stared at the smoke from the cremation one last time. Immediately afterward, she saluted Garbak, letting him know she had returned. He called her a dimwit, asking if she had fun at the relaxing work in the rear, but she gave no response. He asked if she was fired up, and she affirmed. Touri then told him she had a report, letting him know that her mana capacity had gone up, or so she heard. But if she were at her full strength, it was possible for her to use healing magic 3 times in a row. Hearing this, Garbak gave a dry response. Afterward, Touri let her other comrades know she had returned. They welcomed her and commended her on the good work out there. Completely drunk, they asked how the work at the hospital was, and if anyone had bullied her. She then let them know that everyone was kind to her. Touri asked how their day was, and they remarked how they had been digging holes since morning, feeling like they had turned into moles. While they continued rambling, Touri could tell that they all had enough alcohol to get drunk. However, Gray then told her that the commander was all pouty sitting here because he wasn't able to settle things with Kamakiri, so they had to be beaten up again and again as a result. As they started laughing about it, Commander Garbak came in, furiously yelling at them, asking how long they'd keep drinking. Then he ordered them to return to digging holes immediately. He complained about his troops slacking off just because the offensive stopped for a bit. Seeing that Touri was yet to meet with the replacements, he asked her to go and greet them. Afterward, he called over one of the new recruits. The guy walked over with an arrogant look, remarking how Touri was much smaller than he had heard. Is this Salsa 2.0? When Touri returned to the platoon, the reinforcement guys and she got to know each other a little bit. After that, the commander had them start training at the grounds for infantry. Commander Garbak used his harsh words as usual, asking if they were tempting him. Touri responded loudly while barely being able to breathe. As she struggled to push on, the guy beside her remarked that she was so unsightly. That Falmouth guy was a second-class private known as Rodri. He asked Touri how she could be out of breath just after a bit of running. The second guy was a military academy graduate known as Corporal Veldi. and he was also a scout. He urged Touri to keep going just a little more. His corporal rank meant that in the platoon, he was the most senior soldier after Sergeant Garback. And the silent one, whom you couldn't grasp as to what he was thinking about, was a second-class private known as Neridome. Those three were the new members they had gotten this time. Touri felt it was best not to pay them any more attention besides knowing their names. She believed there would be no more being hurt if she weren't friends with them. Immediately afterwards, she stumbled, causing Commander Garback to give them 10 more laps to run. Hearing this, Rodri warned her not to mess with them. He blamed her for everything because they all looked completely exhausted. So, Garback allowed everyone to return to the base except for Touri. As they went on their way, Touri remarked that she should be the one apologizing for getting in everyone's way. Rodri told her that it was good that this happened during training, and if she had done it on the battlefield, all of them could have been dead. He made it clear that for people as incompetent as her, even if they were dying, he would never come running to help. He then asked what was even the point of weaklings such as her being there. Touri gave out a heavy sigh, and then replied that she was the commander's personal first aid kit. Afterward, Garback called her and she quickly ran to him. Meanwhile, Rodri was still confused by what she said. As Touri approached the commander, he told her it was time for defense training. So, he permitted her to use the shield magic spell. As the two stared at each other, Garback suddenly attacked her, but Touri was able to put up a shield just in time. The commander seemed quite impressed, remarking that her deployment speed had increased a bit. Touri then thanked him for the compliment, but he let her know that the angle was bad, and she needed to make the shield right. After that, his aura completely changed as he decided to get serious. Touri started casting the shield spell multiple times, deflecting all the stones the commander threw at her. One of the other soldiers wondered what was going on over there. Then, his comrade told him that it was just the usual crazy commander. Meanwhile, Touri looked totally battered and bruised. However, Garback finally agreed that the shape of her magic shield had become stable. Afterward, he told her to start running. But our protagonist complained that it was dark and she couldn't see more than 1 meter ahead. Garback didn't see the reason for her complaint. He mocked the idea of her thinking it was night, so they should sleep quietly. And that maybe their enemies were so kind. Touri could only tremble and had no choice but to heed the commander's order. Then, she started running in the pitch dark, barely able to catch a breath of relief. The next day, her shield magic training continued. Garback commented that her deployment speed had gotten slower this time. He then told her to keep running her running speed steady and to hold the shield's form stable. Not only that, but she needed to get familiar with surprise attacks and not neglect watching her surroundings. Despite the painful training she was going through, Touri thanked the commander. He then told her that from now on, she had to complete her everyday running quota, and he let her know she had 10 laps left. Touri understood that this kind of struggle would directly affect her survival rate. But it was obvious her body could barely keep up. Eventually, she fell and couldn't go on any longer. So, Garback told her to go work at Gale's the next day. Touri thought about what would happen if she were to do this kind of training before being sent on the battlefield. She tried not to lose her consciousness there. If not, she would get mistaken for a corpse and be thrown into the cremation pit. Whatever the cost, she needed to return to the platoon guys and rest there. Sometime later, Touri saw Gray approaching her and looking sad for her. He couldn't help but notice how she had come back again, looking all battered. Then, he asked Maru to get some hot water. One of the other soldiers remarked that Sergeant Garback wasn't holding back in the slightest. While she cleaned herself, Touri overheard one of the younger recruits complaining about why he had to go through all this. Gray remarked that quite a lot of newbies became like that. Someone then offered to give Touri a blanket so she could go to sleep. After all, she was going to work in the hospital the next day. While she walked to her bed, she caught a glance of the recruit who looked like he was losing his mind. On the other hand, Rodri complained about everyone in the platoon pampering Touri just because she was a girl. So, his seniors teased that they could spoil him too if he wanted. Later, as Touri fell asleep, she suddenly saw herself back at the orphanage, where she was happily welcomed back. Tears welled up in her eyes as she saw Bernie. All the kids then told her to come over before the soup would get cold. Our protagonist happily ran to them, feeling glad to be reunited with her friends. Then, they all sat down at the table to eat. Soon after, Touri realized this was a dream, but it was so peaceful and warm. One of the kids complimented how tasty the food was. And while everyone was enjoying the meal, an eyeball suddenly popped out of Touri's plate. She screamed in terror. And then Salsa's body emerged, telling her that it was unfair to be enjoying all that peace by herself. As he reached for her, Touri pulled back, saying she would not go back there. Dark voices began crying out for help. Filled with terror and pain, Touri swore she would be working hard on the battlefield, fulfilling Salsa's part too. And when the morning would come, she would awaken and fight on as hard as she could. So, she begged Salsa to spare her as he began choking her. Suddenly, Touri awoke to someone right in her face. Before she could ask the guy what he was doing, he quickly covered her mouth and warned her to behave, or he would kill her. Touri realized she had been careless and wondered how she hadn't realized until it had come to this. The guy began running his hands through her body. Normally, our protagonist would be awake by the time she was touched, but it seemed that her sleep today was a little bit deeper. The assailant didn't stop as he began ripping her clothes and telling her to spread her legs. Touri thought that if she obediently stayed like this, she would be executed for the crime of abetting this. While wondering what to do, she immediately kicked Gray, who was sleeping beside her. He quickly woke up, and upon seeing what was going on, he picked up his rifle. Gray pointed at the guy on top of Touri and asked him who he served. He then woke up the rest, asking them to bring a light. Immediately afterward, it was revealed that the culprit was Naradome. While Gray held the rifle at him, he asked Touri to come over to the safer side. Naradome sighed heavily, asking why a man couldn't have a taste of tender flesh before his death. But Gray made it clear that his actions were a violation of military regulations. Even at that, Naradome argued that he only touched her a little bit. He began lying that he was enticed and that Touri consented. But she quickly remarked that it was a complete and utter lie. Realizing that he was going to be killed, Naradome started blaming it all on Touri and said that if they just got their stories straight, he wouldn't be dead. He tried blackmailing her, asking how it felt to kill people, even though she was a medic. However, Gray told our protagonist not to mind his words because he was just crazy. But to everyone's surprise, Touri said she could sympathize with him. She was sure that he went to do such a self-destructive thing, due to being crazed after tasting the battlefield's environment and broken by the fear of death lingering there. She didn't think he was a bad person at all. However, her words made Gray and the others quite concerned. Touri then remarked that if they were to get their stories straight, as he said, then she would have been executed for abetting such a thing. And that was why she didn't really feel any guilt for his death. Hearing this, Gray approved. Naradome then cursed Touri for life, calling her a murderer. Immediately afterward, Commander Garbak showed up, holding Naradome's head and letting him know that on the front lines, murderers were the ones lauded. He then complained about having his beauty sleep interrupted by such a moron. The others quickly greeted Garbak and wanted to brief him on the situation, but he had already heard it all. While nearly crushing Naradome's head, Garbak told him that attacking a woman was a violation of military regulations, and the sentence for that was immediate execution. Naradome couldn't believe what he had just heard. As Garbak asked if he had any last words, he pointed his sword at Naradome's neck, promising to relay his last words as is. In an addendum to the written notice of his death, Garbak would write that he was a useless bunch of vomit who came to the front line only to die a meaningless death. For the first time, I'm totally with Garbak on this one. This dude deserve it. Just before Naradome could be executed, Corporal Veldy suddenly showed up, asking the commander to wait. He then explained that it would be a waste to uselessly throw away the lives of soldiers in the current war situation. So, he asked if it wouldn't be better for the military to re-educate and reform him. Furious, Garbak asked Veldy if he just blabbed something. Even though he was completely terrified, Veldy still remarked that a man losing out to his passions was a thing that often happened. He then questioned if Garbak wasn't quite dismissive of the lives of his subordinates. Regardless, Garbak made it clear that he had no intention of leaving his back to those who were causing harm to his comrades through their actions. He also claimed that there was a possibility of getting shot in the back. Veldy then threatened to report this to his uncle, His Excellency Renville, if Garbak was going to proceed with the execution. The other soldiers were shocked to hear that Renville was Veldi's uncle. Garbak sighed heavily, and just as he expected, Veldi was here to watch him. Veldi remarked that there were already a lot of rumors about the commander, which were both good and bad. But if the bad ones about how dismissive he was toward his subordinates turned out to be true, then he would have to immediately adjust his evaluation. So, Garbak told Veldi that if he was going that far, then it would be under his responsibility to discipline Naradome. No! Naradome needs to be terminated! Please, Garbak. Do something right for the first time in your life. He then warned that the next time this would happen, he would cut all their heads off. After Veldi got the commander's message, Garbak took his leave. Afterward, Touri wondered just who Veldi was, considering he was so dauntless before the scary commander. Veldi then asked Touri to forgive Naradome, explaining that the guy has a common bomb, which many men live their lives with. He claimed everyone here was family and asked Touri to properly get along with Naradome without much hate. This guy has to be completely delusional. At first, Touri thought Corporal Veldi was a sensible person, but it seemed it would take her time to adjust to his peculiarities. Later on, Veldi explained that his uncle was the one extolled as the savior hero, Renville the War Axe. In the end, Commander Garbak had no choice but to back down. One of the soldiers remarked that being entrusted with the nephew of the frontline commander was quite a big deal. As he gave Touri a cup of coffee, Veldi humbly said he was nothing but a foot soldier here. However, Rodri just saw him as some rich boy. Afterward, Veldi admitted that Sergeant Garbak's achievements were nothing to scoff at. But despite that, nasty rumors of him using subordinates as throwaway pawns still persisted. Still, that was all true. And since there weren't any soldiers with strong backing who could report the matter, Veldi was sent to the place to verify the truth of the matter. Meanwhile, Gray complained about Rodri spitting outside the tank after brushing. But the guy didn't bother and wasn't going to. This dude is just stupid. Antagonizing your comrades in arms is one of the fastest way to get to the afterlife. Afterward, Veldi told everyone to consult with him first if Garbak should ever issue any clearly weird orders or punishments. Depending on the nature of the violation, appropriate actions would be taken. The others still didn't seem so comfortable with his words. Veldi still said that after he gained experience here, in the future he would become a staff officer. At that moment, Touri and the others noticed Maru wincing in pain. Maru then told Veldi that they shouldn't get ahead of themselves. The others were confused, and Veldi asked what he meant by that, but Maru didn't give a proper answer. Immediately after, Garbak approached them, remarking that they were quite energetic and chattering since early morning. As everyone quickly greeted the commander, Garbak ordered the infantry to start digging holes and for Touri to go to the hospital. Naradome then followed the others to dig holes. Touri then approached Gray and apologized for what had happened yesterday and the way she had kicked him. But Gray told her not to worry about it and asked if it was scary. Touri replied that it wasn't because hearing his voice was very heartening. As soon as he heard this, Gray wondered if Touri was hitting on him. She then remarked that she'd respect him more if he weren't like this. But Gray remained delusional. The others told Touri to give up on Gray because he was quite a seducer. Alan claimed the best men were more taciturn and earnest. Maru teased him about that, and he begged the guy to stop embarrassing him in front of the kids. Gray then told Touri just to allow the old guys to bicker between themselves. She asked if something good had happened, and Gray told her that just seeing the way she pulled through what had happened made them all naturally happier, including himself. Touri felt happier as well with everyone there. On the other hand, Rodri was repulsed by the whole thing. He remarked that when he saw weak people who were quite good at buttering up to others, he couldn't help but hate them with a passion. Gray then asked Rodri to come over for a bit. He tricked the boy by pointing in a different direction, allowing him to pin Rodri to the ground. Gray then told him to listen well and asked if he knew what kind of people that healing magic usually manifested in. Of course, Rodri had no idea. Gray explained that it was only those with a kind heart who thought about wanting to help others instead of hurting them who could become medics. It was said that among the 100,000 Austin soldiers, the medics comprised around 0.04% to 0.05% of all people. Rodri still didn't get the point, so Gray pinned him harder and told him to treasure the medics more. The guy still struggled, calling Gray a clown and telling him to let go. So, Gray told him that he made Touri mad, and if she didn't want to heal him, then that wasn't his problem. On the other hand, Touri said if she got ordered to heal him, she would obey. However, Rodri let her know that he would gladly die on the battlefield, taking with him as many enemies as he could on the way. Hearing this, Touri and Gray looked sad for him. Touri believed she was a very cowardly person. Since she was afraid of being hurt, she didn't build deep connections with anybody. She was also afraid of being hit, which made her end up not being able to go against the commander. And above anything else, she was not good at hating others. This included the violent Commander Garbak, Naradome, and even the Sabbath soldiers. Despite feeling terror toward all of them, Touri felt that it was a little different from hating them. Perhaps it was due to her past life's values, but she had a strong feeling of aversion toward killing people. That much was true. But from Rodri's point of view, who was a soldier through and through, she was a weakling who evoked a stronger sense of anger just by looking at her. Rodri then confronted Touri, asking why she was staring at him. Immediately afterward, a sudden explosion shook the entire place. Everyone was completely startled. But Garbak knew the enemies had come, so he ordered everyone to quickly take their positions. As the soldiers quickly took their rifles, Rodri was happily awaiting the enemies to come, so he could kill all of them. But Garbak told him to shut his mouth. The commander then permitted Touri to use the shield magic at her discretion, but only limited to urgent times like these. Garbak also told her that while she hid in blind spots, she should be prepared to heal him any time and watch him closely. Meanwhile, Naradome was throwing up, and some of his comrades were trying to tell him to get it together. However, Garbak warned him not to try any funny business and threatened to shoot him immediately if he tried to desert. The same went for Veldi, too. Immediately afterward, Garbak took his rifle and got in position to fire. He noticed Touri staring at him and asked her what was wrong. She then remarked that he wasn't charging in with his saber today. Garbak felt he obviously wouldn't, and wondered if she was stupid. Seeing their commander fight with a gun like the others was kind of refreshing. Garbak then explained that a shootout was the best way to make use of the trench war. Touri asked Garbak why he led the assault with his sword at the ready last time, and he answered that it was because Kamakiri was there, and that as a matter of face, bullets couldn't reach aces. Our protagonist finally understood. Now that she thought about it, Garbak was right. Without batting an eye, he rushed forth amidst the rain of bullets and didn't suffer any wounds. He also said that using either sword skills or equipment together with the shield magic skill, bullets would stop being a concern. Any ace that was worth his salt on the battlefield had already gotten his own answer to gunfire. Garbak added that when you got a way to deal with bullets to a certain extent, one would earn the position to live a luxurious and leisurely life in this hell. He then told Touri to aim for that. Immediately afterward, someone reported that the first and second defense lines had been breached. The enemy was quickly advancing. Garbak had an excited smile on his face as he told his troops to be at ready. So they would make their enemies rue the day. They decided to attack the line his unit was protecting. As the enemies rushed in, they began exchanging gunfire. Soldiers from both sides were going down, but Garbak remained precise with his targets, taking down each person he set his sights on. Rodri, on the other hand, was happy taking down the Sabbathan devils. He finally had the slaughter he had been long waiting for. Garbak then smacked his head, telling him to stop shouting because he couldn't hear the enemy's gunfire. Meanwhile, Touri remained silent. Despite their efforts, more enemies just kept trooping in, and Garbak's men were slowly being taken down. Immediately afterward, one of the soldiers reported that the defense line on the right was about to be overrun. Garbak then ordered Maru, Gray, and Rodri to defend the right side of the trench with their lives. Rodri happily went, excited to kill all the enemies. Even when the enemies were hiding, he yelled at them to come out and face him. Gray advised him not to waste bullets and offered to show him something good if he listened. He brought a grenade and tossed it at the enemies, causing a huge explosion. With the enemies killed, Gray then told Rodri to advance. But all Rodri could think about was how much he wanted those grenades. Back with Touri, a soldier told her and Verdi to focus on the enemies ahead of him, and to leave the ones on the right to Maru and the others. Still, the soldier was so scared, Touri noticed when he pissed his pants. She then noticed the enemies shooting mortars, So she put up a shield and alerted Alan, who used wind blast magic to send the mortars back, crushing the enemies. Touri was really impressed with his magic, so he offered to teach it to her later. Later, Verdi reported that the enemies had broken through on the left, and that they were going for a pincer attack. At this point, Garbak couldn't take it anymore. He unsheathed his sword and decided to go all in. He ordered Touri to watch him closely while he tried to regain the position on the left. While he was issuing orders, an enemy was sneaking up behind him. In an instant, he sliced the guy apart and charged in. As Touri had thought, Garbak was a lot stronger with a sword. Meanwhile, the others were still trying to hold their position. But the enemies just kept coming as if there was no end to them. Maru wondered if these soldiers weren't afraid of death. He then asked if Naradome was asleep, but there was no response. He told the guy to continue shooting, but soon saw that Naradome had already been shot in the head. Yes! He got what he deserved. Veldy wailed loudly, and the others were shocked. While they were distracted, the enemies climbed over the trench, kicking Naradome to the side. His dead body flew across the place. Meanwhile, Corporal Veldy was still crying as an enemy rushed in and quickly sliced off his arm. Before the enemy was about to finish him off, Alan yelled at him to get down. Then, he fired a shot, but his aim was off, which made the bullet not pierce through. The next moment, Touri found herself face to face with the same enemy, and as the guy raised his sword to end her, Alan yelled at her to run. But the sword was already coming down on her. What Touri saw in those eyes was an overflowing desire to kill and hatred. She didn't understand the enemy's language. His words were all Greek to her, but one thing was clear without saying it. He was telling her to die. Maru was still fighting off an enemy as he yelled Touri's name. She panicked with tears filling her eyes. And immediately after, she cast shield magic. The enemy's sword slid off the shield and only managed to crack it a bit. Both he and Touri were confused. Then, he lost his balance. As he quickly recovered and turned to face her, Rodri ran into him with a dagger. The enemy groaned in pain, while Rodri kept telling him to die. He punched Rodri away, but the pain was too much, and he tried crawling away. But Rodri questioned where he was going, calling him a disgusting piece of garbage, a savage, and a brute. He said that this was retribution for all the indiscriminate killing they had done, and continued rampaging as he stabbed the enemy to death. His face was like a maniac's, filled with extreme joy. All the blood splashed out onto Touri's face. Immediately after, Gray told Rodri to stop because the enemy had already died. Rodri had no idea. Seriously, this guy must have some mental issues. Gray then told him to come, so they could return to their other enemies. While looking down at his defeated enemy he stabbed, Rodri remarked that he should have suffered a lot more before dying. After that, he ran off to join the others. For Touri, it seemed she was saved for the time being. Following that, Corporal Veldy ran to Touri and cried out, showing her his severed arm. She took a look at his arm. Upon analyzing it, she noticed it was a clean cut and said that if it was healed quickly, it could be reconnected. She then told him to pick up the severed limb and meet her, so she could disinfect the wound. She recalled that the commander had given her an order to watch him closely. There was no helping it. She needed to perform first aid while confirming his status. As Veldy brought the limb to her, our protagonist told him it would hurt and asked him to bear the pain. As she disinfected it, he screamed in pain, but she focused on her work. With the stanching done, he wouldn't die of blood loss. Our protagonist told Veldy that when the commander returned, she would put forth a request to heal him. For now, she needed him to stand by. However, Veldy tried to make it clear that his hand was actually severed. But Touri apologized, letting him know that she couldn't use healing magic willingly. She then offered him the remnants of the saline solution, which was used for cleaning wounds. He needed to stay hydrated after blood loss. But Veldy's eyes were filled with tears as he remarked that this was not it. He then ordered her to use healing magic on him. He wanted to return to the battlefield quickly and needed her to use her magic now. If she didn't hurry, it would be impossible for him to return. Veldy yelled at our protagonist to attach his arm back and pleaded desperately. Touri humbly apologized to him, reminding him that he didn't have the authority to command her. However, she told him not to worry because the time limit for reattaching a severed hand was several hours, so they still had enough time to do it. Veldy found her reasoning absurd, all because he didn't have the authority. But our protagonist made it clear that orders were absolute, leaving him speechless. Well, now he has to suffer for helping Touri's night attacker. She explained that the last time she used magic to heal a comrade without the commander's permission, she was harshly disciplined. In other words, if she were to heal Veldy, they would both be severely punished. Veldy couldn't believe there was no way she wouldn't be allowed to heal such a serious wound. He promised to put the word out and protect her if anything happened, but Touri's response remained the same. Orders were absolute. Veldy still tried arguing, but seeing the dead look on her face, he couldn't say anything else. And so, he finally accepted that he didn't have the right to command her. She was glad he understood. Immediately afterward, Alan informed Touri that the commander was about to return. She then excused herself and met up with Alan, asking where the commander was. He pointed him out where he was decapitating an enemy's head. Garbak made it known that he had returned. Seeing the commander dripping in blood, Touri thought that he looked way scarier to her than the enemies. Garbak then asked Alan for a report. Touri welcomed the commander back and asked if he was hurt, but he wasn't. Alan then told the commander that, aside from the second-class private Neradome, everyone else was alive. Garbak brought out a cigarette as he remarked that Neradome had died. He added that a newbie who gave in to despair wasn't worth anything. And it was a simple truth. Alan pointed him to Neradome's dead body on the ground. Afterward, the commander remarked how he didn't even last one battle. Corporal Veldy then called to Garbak. The commander looked irritated as he answered. Then, Touri told him that Veldy needed to be treated with healing magic. Veldy also explained that his hand had been cut off. Looking at the severed arm, Garbak was impressed with the enemy's skill, but it still wasn't as good as his. He then told Veldy to wait until the end of the battle before being healed. The corporal couldn't believe it. Afterward, he fainted. As the others tried to call him to his senses, he told them that he couldn't. On the other hand, Garbak saw some soldiers returning. It was the Maru team. Seeing they had returned, Garbak commended them on the good work. Suddenly, a flare was shot into the sky. Upon seeing it, Alan remarked that it was a signal flare from their allies. Since the enemy's attacks had stopped for now, Garbak decided to send one too. He brought the shell and loaded it into the gun before shooting the flare in the sky. After some time, his expression became serious. It seemed that everyone else in other trenches had perished miserably. The commander then remarked that they were the only ones who had survived on this line. Being able to confirm the end of the enemy assault, he then permitted the use of healing magic on Corporal Veldy. Touri thought that was good because if she had succumbed to the corporal's plea and used magic, she'd most likely be dead by now. Immediately afterward, she used her healing magic to reattach Veldy's severed arm. The other soldiers watched curiously as our protagonist did her thing. When the healing was done, Veldy was amazed. He started swinging his arm around, but our protagonist told him to stop and not move it yet. Suddenly, his arm started bleeding again, and she explained that it was merely a stopgap measure. To heal it completely, it needed to be treated further at the field hospital. Hearing this, Commander Garbak told Veldy to go get healed at the hospital quickly. Touri then held the arm in place with a bandage before leaving. Meanwhile, Gray teased Rodri, telling him how their little healer was cool. But Rodri thought nothing of it. The other soldiers asked the commander if they should do the usual before Corporal Veldy left. Gray then explained to Rodri that it was a gesture of presenting arms for the fallen. However, Garbak wondered who even cared about Neradome in the first place. He then ordered Rodri to drag the dead body to the cremation pit in the rear. Looking at the dead body, Rodri seemed uncomfortable, but Gray cheered him on to do it. As Rodri dragged Neradome's body, our protagonist approached him. And after an awkward moment, she thanked him very much for his help. But he didn't understand what she was talking about. She then reminded him that he had saved her when she was in danger. He still didn't remember. Touri had to remind him of when the enemy swordsman jumped into their trench. That's when Rodri remembered that she had almost died back there. To him, it was just that he saw an enemy's back before his eyes by chance, and he killed him because he could. That was all there was to it. Touri thought it seemed like that. He didn't put any thought into his own well-being at all. He then asked her why she didn't counterattack. The question confused her. Rodri was asking if she had a fighting spirit, even though she was weak. Our protagonist let him know that she was just a medic and didn't have any fighting equipment. He asked what she was using her hands and teeth for. Even without a weapon, if there was an enemy before her, it was obvious that she had to kill them. Seeing that she had nothing to say, Rodri reminded her that he wouldn't ever try to save her. He also warned her not to ever try to snuggle up to him. Immediately after, Garbak called her, saying he had heard from Alan that she used shield magic during the battle. She confirmed this. The commander then remarked that, while finding the perfect moment to use shield to block an attack in close quarters was the basics of its use, when it came to actually utilizing it in the heat of battle, it was very difficult. It was almost impossible to pull it off the first time. He then asked if she remembered what she tried to do. Our protagonist answered that she tried to deflect the enemy's attack without taking it on, as he had told her. The shield's angle, which she made at that moment, was even more acute than when he had taught her. Right in front of the enemy, she projected an Isoseal's triangle shield as sharp as the tip of a spear. She thought it was almost involuntary. If this continued, she would die. She would just uselessly squander the life Salsa gifted her. Thinking about it, it was vexing to her. She didn't want to even think about doing that. After hearing her, the commander commended Touri for doing well. He then tossed a container, and she saw it was a container of chocolate. That night, after the commander told our protagonist to get some rest, she asked to sleep next to Gray, just for peace of mind. She apologized for the inconvenience, but he didn't mind. On the other hand, Rodri was irritated by her presence. As usual, his scornful and piercing gaze made her feel ill at ease. But it was still leagues below the gratefulness and happiness of being able to survive yet another day in her mind. She then wished them a good night. Suddenly, Touri was caught in a hellish nightmare where Garbak had severe injuries, asking her to save him. While she was trying to heal him, Gray also came to her, begging to be helped. She was shocked by the sight. And as if that wasn't enough, Salsa also approached her, pleading that he didn't want to die. Her subordinates swarmed, begging for help, and she was overwhelmed. She cried out, telling Salsa she was sorry. She wanted to help, but she couldn't help everyone, and she kept apologizing as she held tightly onto Gray's shirt. Meanwhile, Rodri stared at her, looking angry as usual. In the morning, they returned to digging pits. Our protagonist picked up a disinfectant bottle and started checking all her healing materials, but they weren't enough. Considering the damage from yesterday's defensive battle, it would be difficult to procure more. While she was taking records, Rodri told Gray that he wanted to get his hands on some grenades. Touri seemed to freeze as she heard that. Gray then told the guy that he couldn't, and Rodri asked why. Gray explained that it was only private first class and above who had access to explosives. Rodri angrily asked if he knew how many enemies he could have bombed to death, if he had even one grenade. Gray shot back, letting him know that he hadn't thought about how much it cost to make just one hand grenade. They didn't have a lot of resources to make them and hand them out to new little recruits who were going to die quickly most of the time. Rodri thought this was unfair because he just wanted to bomb people. While they were still arguing, our protagonist thought about how a hand grenade was a fearsome weapon. In addition to the blast wave with a radius of 4 to 5 meters or 28 bananas, it also scattered shrapnel at high speed. Most people in the affected area were either injured or killed. Touri was reminded of when she was caught in an explosion, and an image of Salsa's dead body flashed in her mind. Afterward, Rodri decided he would ask the commander himself, but Gray advised him to drop the idea. Rodri teased that he would steal his thunder, and Gray didn't have the words for him. With a dead look in her eyes, Touri told him to stop being so flippant with the idea of wanting to bomb people. As he turned, she returned to her records. Rodri approached her, warning that eavesdropping was bad manners. But the look she gave him made him pull back a little. Immediately, Garbak called out to Touri and told her that as of the moment, she was under the command of Chief Medical Officer Gale. He then ordered her to proceed to the field hospital immediately. As she prepared to live, Rodri remarked that she was so lucky working in the hospital since she could get a nice meal. There were also snacks. However, our protagonist ignored him and bid farewell to Gray. After that, while Garbak was smoking, Rodri met the commander and asked him for hand grenades. But the request completely annoyed the commander. Before Rodri could react, Garbak landed a devastating punch that sent him flying away, and he was bleeding out badly. Gray quickly covered his eyes because he knew this was going to happen. Garbak then explained to Rodri that only first-class privates were issued hand grenades and it was the military law. Rodri still tried to argue, but the commander's threatening expression made him calm down. Garbak asked if he was such a big shot that he could twist military regulations, or if he had done something outstanding for his country. Rodri obviously hadn't. Now is time for Rodri to learn that you don't mess with this guy. Garbak started beating him up. Gray quickly stopped him, warning that if he continued, it would be dangerous. But Garbak suddenly punched Gray in the guts as well. Gray hunched over, enduring the pain, and Rodri tried to help. But Garbak sat on Gray, explaining that in the past, newly recruited grenadiers, who misjudged the speed of the unit's advance, threw their grenades into the enemy trenches just as he passed them. From then on, they didn't get grenadiers because they'd be nothing more than a nuisance. He asked Rodri if he understood now, and the boy affirmed that he did. Over at the hospital, Gale was excited to see Touri had finally arrived. She quickly dragged off our protagonist, asking her to go to the emergency ward right away. Touri wondered why, and Gale told her that she had gathered everything she needed for now inside a tent. They didn't have enough beds, and some relatively lightly wounded people would come in there, so she was leaving it all to Touri. She then handed our protagonist a white coat and entrusted everything to her. The tent was filled with a lot of wounded soldiers in a lot of pain. They were getting impatient as they were waiting to get examined. Immediately afterward, Touri walked in, thanking them for waiting. As the soldiers saw her, they looked speechless. She then told them to enter in order. One of them quickly said to spare them the joke. First, they had to wait for God knew how long, and now he couldn't believe they were going to be healed by a brat. He complained about having to wait all night for this, and begged that they be given another, more knowledgeable medic. Touri seemed hurt by his words, but she steeled herself, and told him to leave if he was dissatisfied. The wounded soldier was shocked by her remark, but upon seeing how serious she looked, he pleaded to be examined. Every wounded person had more than a few complaints about how their body hurt. One of the soldiers asked for his leg to be healed immediately. But with the amount of magic our protagonist had, she could only use the heal skill 3 times. Even if she were to boost herself with medicine, she still couldn't use it willingly. She examined the soldier's leg and saw it was a simple fracture. So, she told him she would fix it in place, and it would heal in time. Without using magic, she could only tell people with minor injuries to bear with it, and wait to heal. When the next patient came in, he was happy to be finally treated. Looking at his bleeding arm, our protagonist saw that it had necrosis. Sadly, even with magic, it couldn't be healed. She had to cut it off, so she told the man to prepare himself. But he didn't want that. The next person came in with a bad-looking face. Touri saw that it had been bathed in an incendiary blast. She would put an ointment on it to help. Lightly injured basically meant one with no immediate danger to life. They ranged in severity from those that could be treated quickly to major injuries that left lasting damage for life. Miss Gale had told her that they were relatively lightly wounded people, but she was probably referring to those who, even if treated, could not immediately return to the front lines and were considered low priority for medical examination. Afterward, Touri continued treating patients after patients, even those who shamelessly showed her their backside. Being in the army must definitely be tough. Our protagonist looked like she was just about to pass out, but the nurse told her that the last patient was here. Touri told the person to come in, and as the guy walked in while complaining, she couldn't believe who she was seeing. It was Rodri, and he, too, was shocked to see her. The two were confused, but he told her to quickly heal him while calling her incompetent. He told her that his whole body was hurting. In addition to being beaten all over, she saw that some of his joints were dislocated. Some of his ribs were also affected. She could imagine the whole picture herself. Then, she asked where the injuries came from. Rodri told her that the commander beat him up when he asked for some grenades. Hearing this, she was exhausted. She wished the commander would just stop creating unnecessary work for her. She then asked Rodri to wait before she would use a healing spell on him. As he saw her drinking something, he asked what it was because it smelled nice to him. He kept bugging her and asking for a bit of it. After downing the liquid, she told him that she would carefully treat him very kindly and thoroughly. After all, she was his lifesaver. The author must have been on something for this panel. Even Rodri seemed scared right now. But after our protagonist healed him, his body moved freely again. However, he told her that it still hurt, and he had to wait several hours to heal completely. He called her work sloppy, and she apologized. After that, she bid him farewell. She was barely able to keep her eyes open. Rodri suddenly returned, and she asked if there was something else. He then said she could simply call him by his name. Touri was speechless, yet he also asked if he could call her Runt. She had gone from Pipsqueak to Runt now, and she was tired. After finishing her work at the first aid station, Touri went on to have a tasty meal. She returned the plates after eating and proceeded to the nap room. She was completely exhausted, but now she could finally sleep, and just as she dozed off, a patient started wailing for help. It was an alarm that signaled a danger to a patient who was bedridden. Our protagonist was forced to wake up and assist the medics who were rushing out. While quickly getting dressed, she noticed someone peeking at her, but as she turned, he went back to sleep. Here, unlike in the first aid station, one mistake could cost a patient's life. What made it even more frightening was the fact that both the head of this ward and other medics hadn't slept for a week. Immediately afterward, Touri began attending to a patient. Upon analyzing, she alerted that his blood pressure was going down. The patient had sepsis, and they needed some antibiotics, but the nurse gestured that there was none left. Touri turned back to the head medic, but he simply remarked that it was too bad then, and she couldn't believe his words. He told her that there was nothing more they could do for him. She was told to focus on treating those who could still be saved. Looking back at the dying patient, Touri approached him and held his hand softly. The patient shed a tear, and all she could do was watch. Meanwhile, someone else had passed away, and his body was about to be carried out. The head medic then said to put one of the high-priority traged patients in the hallway on the free bed. The only thing that they, who were left without any way to treat or even to help, were forced to do was to make a choice as to which of the patients lying there, unaware of their surroundings, would be allowed to survive. Our protagonist thought that she was unlucky. She might end up as one of those sleeping on one of these beds. Then, by order of the head, the bodies were carried out like clockwork and thrown into the pit with the corpses. Both the field hospital and the front lines were hell on earth. At the crack of dawn, Touri was finally able to leave. Afterward, she was grateful that they resupplied her with the necessary medical materials. She then came across Gray, who was talking to someone, and she asked who the guy was. Gray told her that he was Rodri's comrade from his former unit. The man came to see how Rodri was doing in their unit out of concern for him. Our protagonist was surprised as she realized Rodri wasn't a new recruit. She asked if he had been kicked out of his former unit because of the way he spoke. But Gray said it wasn't. It seemed that Rodri was a normal, energetic, and bratty kid, but she could hardly believe it. Even I can't believe that. No way that boy could have ever been normal. The survivors of a destroyed squad were assigned to a platoon to fill any vacancies. So, she believed it was the case with Rodri's squad. After that, Gray called to Touri, who was looking grim, and told her that flowers were blooming in a place like this. This made her cheer up a bit, but immediately after, Garbak told them that the long-awaited day of their offensive was here. They all looked shocked. Gray asked if they were going to attack with the forces they had. Garbak then told him that it was estimated that a lot of enemy soldiers were out of commission. So the command decided that if they took this chance to attack, they would retake the land in one fell swoop. In trench warfare, it was common knowledge that the attacking side would suffer heavy casualties. This war was a series of repeating the same actions over and over again. After the enemy, straining, went on the offensive and exhausted its forces, they would take advantage of the opening and go on the offensive themselves. All the while, they'd be consuming a large number of soldiers' lives. Garbak then commanded Alan to scout ahead. As usual, our protagonist would follow right behind him. Maru and Gray were told to protect her from both sides. While Gray was happy to be with Touri, Rodri asked the commander what his orders for him were. Garbak said that he and Veldy were going to protect our protagonist as well. Rodri was quite upset, but the commander's expression made him settle down again. Still, he wondered how he was supposed to kill while lagging right behind the blondie. As usual, his killing intent was freshly charged. Were these peaceful times, she'd never willingly associate with a person like him. He started poking her head, telling her he was going to be watching over her, so if she tarried, he would put an enema in her. But Touri simply asked him to stop poking. On the other hand, Gray speculated she might be the one to win the race in the trenches. But Rodri doubted he'd ever lose to her in speed. They faced the enemies in trench positions across the 400-meter or 2,247.19 bananas wide no man's land, but the place was abandoned, full of rotting corpses and turned into a poisoned swamp, with shell craters lying in wait for them across the scene. Not to mention the soft dirt that sucked one in if they were slow. Walking was already hard enough, let alone running. Because the trenches were dug in a zigzag pattern, the distance between the trenches varied from place to place. The entrenched positions they were trying to take from the enemy today were about 20 meters apart. An athlete could cover this distance in about 4 seconds. But the battlefield was littered with barbed wire and magic traps, and they had to run with 20 kilograms or 176.37 bananas in weight of equipment on their back while killing enemies who shot them from their positions in the trenches. Not to mention that the one leading them was a monster of a commander who could easily cut through bullets with his sword. Our protagonist could barely keep up with him. Meanwhile, the others were betting on Rodri getting tired and collapsing along the way. Rodri then bet a higher amount on himself, boasting that he would win. Garbak warned that if he broke up the formation, he would kill him. He approached the kid and grabbed his head, telling him to listen. The commander told him to learn well and become strong. If he did that, Garbak would let him go in the front. Rodri was bumped, seeing that he had no choice. So he slowly walked behind Touri. Immediately after, Garbak informed everyone that the allied mages were going to start bombing the place. In the midst of despair, they would have a fight, and as soon as the bombing stopped, they'd rush in, so he told everyone to get ready. Soon after, the bombing began, and explosions were going off. As the soldiers watched, one of them remarked that it was what you'd expect from a Trueborn magic squad. Those fireballs were going to melt and burn both the first and second floors of the trenches. Meanwhile, Touri asked Veldi how his hand was, and he told her it was all right now, all thanks to her. He thanked her. And while trying to reload his gun, some of the bullets slipped out of his hand. He felt quite clumsy, and as he was picking them up, she saw that his hands were trembling. Rodri tried to make sure he was okay, but Veldi had no idea what was even wrong with him. He asked if this was his first day of being part of an attack, and it turned out that it was. The image of Narodom's death was still plaguing Veldi's mind. The expression on his face after he died was seared into his mind. No matter how hard Veldi tried to focus on what was in front of him, he couldn't pull it together. Touri, on the other hand, remained speechless. Rodri told Veldi to stop crying and get it together. Suddenly, Maru approached them and helped the corporal pick up his bullets. He didn't plan to say anything complicated, so he told Veldi to simply run and watch Touri's back, however he could. There weren't many who would try to shoot him from the rear. So, Murray told him not to be afraid and do his duty. Veldi agreed, and this managed to cheer him up. Then, they both bumped fists. Immediately after, Garbak checked his time and drew his sword as the time had come for them to act. He was ready to mete out divine punishment on the enemies. With the commander in the lead, he and his soldiers charged forward. Touri seemed to be struggling as all her fellow troops charged forward relentlessly. With arms in hand, they all beamed straight for the enemy's trenches. It was obvious that their morale was really high. Meanwhile, the enemy soldiers had mounted a heavy machine gun and began firing it. Although some were injured, Commander Garbak used his sword to slice through the bullets. And when he was close enough, he sliced the soldiers, sending parts of their faces flying everywhere. One of the sliced-up faces landed on Veldi. Upon seeing it, the corporal screamed in terror. Maru told him that if he had time to scream, he had better run faster. They all continued their sprint. Immediately afterward, our protagonist came across a sinking sea of corpses, and she had to use the logs there to get across. As she took a step, Gray advised her not to rush, but to go slowly. Touri did as she was told, while Gray watched her back. But eventually, the logs started rolling, and she slipped. Luckily, Maru caught her before she fell inside. After that, Gray signaled to the others to start moving. With a great leap, he made it across safely. Veldi then asked Rodri to go first. So, Rodri leaped forward with joy, hopping across the logs quickly. As he slipped on one, he managed to use the blade on his gun to hold himself from falling into the water. Immediately afterward, he jumped forward. Gray grabbed his hand and quickly tossed him aside, as he called for Corporal Veldi to come next. He then calmly helped Veldy to the other side. Rodri began complaining because he got covered in dirt, but Gray told him to forget it and just run. As the troops continued dashing forward, Touri was shocked as Alan got shot. However, Gray told her not to stop running. Garback was informed about Alan's condition, and he ordered Maru to get him. Maru quickly turned around, heading straight to his comrade. He told Alan to get it together, but the soldier could barely feel his arm. Maru assured him that Touri would patch him up in no time. Seeing how far behind Maru was, Veldy informed Garback that Maru wouldn't be able to catch up with them if they maintained their current speed. Regardless, Garback ordered him to shut up and simply follow, leaving Veldy with not much of a choice. Immediately afterward, the crazy commander dived into the enemy trenches. The enemy soldiers were scared as he let them know that they were about to have a dance with death. With one swing, he cleaved their faces in two. More enemies showed up to fight back, but Garback sliced through them in a flash. The other soldiers couldn't help but compliment on how cool he was. Rodri remarked that it was like a blood tornado had gone through here. As Touri began treating Alan, Garback decided he would take control of the right position. He ordered Gray to take Rodri and Veldy to handle the right side. Then Garback asked Touri how Alan was doing. She told him that the nerve plexus in his right shoulder was damaged and he couldn't move his arm. Plus, he was bleeding a lot. They needed to take him to the back and heal him there. The commander then asked her to treat Alan so that he could function minimally, while Merle would stay there to protect her. A wounded person who couldn't move was left in the secured trench while the advance continued. It was done this way because he was safer. Touri stared at Alan as he laughed and remarked that he got himself saved by her once again. Alan then called Maru, apologizing because he would have to leave Touri to him. But Maru understood. He felt his life was already done. What a way to go out. A protagonist told him that he couldn't be unconscious at the moment. Even if friendly troops caught up, he might be ignored and abandoned once they thought he was dead. Maru and Touri then yelled out to Alan. But with no response, Maru lit a cigarette, leaving our protagonist confused. He then gave it to Alan to smoke, explaining that it was a special product given to him by the commander. Immediately afterward, Alan's eyes sparked open. His expression looked crazy and full of energy. So, Touri asked Maru what it was, but he advised her not to breathe the smoke. After all, it was a foot soldier's friend, which he called a cheer-up stick. Of course, Touri was still confused. Meanwhile, Alan started laughing to himself. He complimented on how good the smoke was, but Touri made sure to focus on the bag she was packing. This guy was going too crazy for her to handle. Afterward, Garback returned and looked at Alan, who thanked him. He noticed he was quite cheerful, and then snatched the cigarette from his mouth. The commander started smoking it himself as Gray and the others also returned. Thereafter, Garback decided it was time to rush to the second trench. Veldy stopped the commander for a minute because he found something weird, though this only made Garback more impatient. Veldy then asked why they were attacking again when the friendly troops hadn't yet caught up with them. He remarked that it was very dangerous. This kind of attack was not written in textbooks. In fact, it was the very example of an erroneous attack that the commander mustn't attempt. Hearing this, the commander slowly came down from the ladder to approach Veldy. As the corporal yelled out to him, Muru decided to tell Veldy something good. He let the corporal know that his textbooks were just stuff written by cowards who fled to the rear. He saw it as merely a paper to wipe away their dung. Veldy questioned if he was implying that he gratefully learned by rote from toilet paper. Muru then told him that he couldn't make fun of toilet paper and that he had to appreciate the stuff that wipes his butt on a battlefield. Hearing this, Corporal Veldy let them know that he would have liked the valiant commander to distribute the textbooks he had written from the very beginning. But the commander didn't get an education and was unable to write words. In a real battle, it was said that moderate nervousness and proper relaxation gave birth to maximum performance. Light-hearted jokes that might seem indecent at first glance could have the opposite effect from what one might expect. Immediately after, Gray asked Rodri if he was all right. Though he said he was fine, Gray still asked if he was sure. Rodri was panting hard while complaining because he hadn't killed anyone yet. Our protagonist then suggested that he take it easy and stay in the trench for now. Still, Rodri boasted that he was still all nice and ready. Touri couldn't take him seriously. As she climbed the ladder, what she was about to say, made him start sweating a lot. She then begged him not to die on her, since she had tried her best to heal him yesterday. Hearing her words, Rodri remarked that it was obvious he wouldn't. Immediately after, Garbak heard some noises approaching, and as he turned, he saw a lot of soldiers approaching. These were the friendly troops who had finally caught up. With everyone assembled, Garbak then ordered his men to charge. As they dashed forward, he used his sword to block the incoming bullets. Still, the enemies were relentless, and he seemed to be struggling. Sighting a wagon, Garbak signaled his men to quickly take cover under there. Under the wagon, they shielded themselves from the barrage of enemy bullets. The enemies were all aiming their fire at them. Veldi thought this was crazy, and remarked that no matter how many lives they had, following Garbak during his attack was idiocy. But Muru let him know that their unit actually had the lowest casualty rate. That was one of the reasons they got a medic assigned to them. Veldi couldn't believe it. Garbak then asked Veldi to go shoot the enemies, since he had so much time to whine and moan. Thanks to Garbak's protection, the mortality rate had relatively improved compared to other units. As Veldi tried to stand, they told him to get down, but the next second a bullet pierced him. When considering the mortality rate, relatively was the operative word here. As Veldi fell over, Touri screamed his name. They tried to get Veldi to keep it together, but he couldn't believe that he was actually shot. Our protagonist told him not to talk. He asked if he was going to die, causing her eyes to grow wide in fear. Immediately after, she called the commander, who didn't appreciate being bothered. Touri let him know that unless they used healing magic immediately, Corporal Veldi was going to die. While Muru was trying to get Veldi to hold on, Garbak asked our protagonist what her remaining mana was. She responded that without a potion, she could use healing magic twice, and with a potion, she could use it 3 times. With this in mind, the commander ordered her to use it once on Veldi. Heeding the command, she took a deep breath and cast healing magic on the corporal. The enemies caught sight of the bright light and wondered what it was, finding it suspicious. But their determination to kill was still there, so they kept firing. As the heavy gunfire continued, Gray reported that the barricade was breaking. Garbak asked Touri if she could move Veldi, and she responded that it was more or less when she was done with the blood stanching. Then, he asked Muru to drag Veldi into the trench when that was done. Garbak ordered Gray and Rodri to follow him to take control of the second line. As he unsheathed his blade, the bloodlust in his eyes was evident. He charged forward relentlessly. The enemies rained down bullets, but Garbak sliced all of them apart, leaving them confused. He trampled on one of their heads and began attacking, taking them down one by one. Gray and Rodri followed suit, shooting down more enemies that emerged. However, Garbak was just getting started. His swordsmanship was vicious as he sliced through the enemy lines. While Rodri was captivated by the dead bodies, Gray told him that they had to keep moving. Rodri then remarked that he always knew their commander was freaking cool. Afterward, Muru hid behind cover to observe the field ahead, and noted that the trench ahead of them had gone quiet, so he signaled our protagonist to go. However, they needed to check inside just in case. They peeked their heads to observe and saw a pile of dead bodies, which put them more at ease. Then, Muru set Veldi down, while Touri brought out all the medical equipment she needed to treat him. She began the treatment, stitching him up, applying ointments, and checking his pulse. After setting up an IV line, she remarked that they could take a little breather now. Afterward, Veldi began moving and faintly called our protagonist, saying that he wanted to apologize. He was sorry for what happened during the Neridone case, and felt stupid for not thinking about her feelings. He begged for her forgiveness, but Touri told him it was okay and not to worry about it anymore. He finally noticed that he messed up. Progress. This put a smile on the corporal's face, and he was glad. Worried, Touri screamed out to him. Then, Muru lit a cigarette and stuck it in Veldi's mouth, causing him to jolt up. He was shocked by how sweet the smoke was. Muru saw him as a promising kid as Veldi questioned if this was tobacco. Wow, Muru really know how to fix a bad situation, if you know what I mean. On the other hand, Touri was upset, so Muru asked for her forgiveness. Veldi started laughing, questioning if he had also become an old guy. He wondered if he would be able to become someone who understood the deliciousness of tobacco. Muru called the corporal a good man, letting him know that it would be a tad boring for him to die here. He noted that Veldy had yet to experience a lot of stuff like alcohol and women. Our protagonist also remarked that one day he would become a staff officer, so there was no time to feel sorry for himself. They encouraged him to climb up the ranks at the top and pull all of them out of there to the safety of the rear. Immediately afterward, Muru stood, noticing there was an enemy soldier still alive. He quickly aimed his gun while ordering Touri to get down. Then, Muru blasted the guy's head with one shot, sending him to the grave. The sight left our protagonist frightened. He remained on guard, telling her to keep it low because another enemy might still appear. The next set of footsteps that approached him seemed off until he realized who it was. It was none other than Commander Garbak, who had just returned. Still with his scary expression, he asked how Veldy was doing. Touri informed him that the corporal was able to cling to his life, but a more professional surgery needed to be performed in a hospital. Garbak then asked Muru how the rear was, to which Muru told him that they still couldn't catch up. He asked the commander if the enemy attacks had come to an end. Garbak called him an idiot, saying the third time was going to be the real deal. Now was the time to rip and tear into the enemy since their reserves were running thin. If allies from both sides caught up, Garbak told them that they were going to take the lead and rush in. Just then, Gray and the others returned. Afterward, Rodri suddenly threw up. Looking at him, Garbak told Rodri that he would leave him here if he was exhausted. Despite the fact that he was struggling to breathe, Rodri insisted that he could still run. The commander then made it clear that, unlike before, when they stormed into trenches that had been thoroughly trashed by artillery fire, this time it was going to be different. Troops, who, like Rodri, were unharmed and full of killing intent, would be lying in wait for them. Garbak added that the third line of defense was literally hell. Regardless, Rodri still said he would go. Glancing at him, the commander then dragged him off to show something. Immediately afterward, Garbak pointed to the sky, and Rodri was stunned by the sight. Magic flares went up into the air. Then they exploded and started raining down destruction on the entire area. It was known as the Rainbow of Death, which exploded in the air, scattering magical bullets in a wide radius. They were the size of a pinky, but they burst at the slightest tremor or heat, leaving only ash behind. Garbak told Rodri that they were going to run through there without a break, and asked if he could do it. It was a sparkling, starry sky above the midday trenches. Vibrant hues that looked like they came from a game screen. An illusory curtain of auroras spread, as if marking the boundaries of the trenches with its splendor. Our protagonist was marveled at the sight. Afterward, Rodri told the commander that he could do it, asking that he be allowed to run too. Garbak patted his head and then checked on Touri to make sure she could still move. He seemed glad to see that she had graduated from a caterpillar to an ant. She was honored by his words. She then understood the situation. Since her stamina still had some room today, the commander planned to rush the enemy again. It seemed like he was trying to match the advance with her endurance so far. She wondered if she should try to fake exhaustion from now on. Afterward, it was reported that the friendly troops had begun to advance. Garbak remarked that today was the day they were going to tear apart the Federation's defense line. He cast shield magic in front of everyone, asking if they were ready. Then, he ordered them to run like their life depended on it. They started charging forward. Meanwhile, our protagonist was looking quite nervous. Suddenly, Muru was shot, and the blood splattered across Touri's helmet. She tried reaching for him, but she was dragged back. So, she called out to Muru, but he simply smiled, telling her to go and not to worry about him. Gray held our protagonist tight as they were yelled at to run. As they left, Muru sat down and lit a cigarette for himself. Veldy asked if he was shot as well, but Muru told him to sleep, letting him know it was just a scratch and nothing to sweat over. Veldy asked if he was sure, and he confirmed it. Then Muru puffed a cloud of smoke. He took note of the good weather as it reminded him of a time when he was just a wee lad. The corporal agreed with him, saying it made one realize how stupid it was to fight wars. Muru agreed with him. Suddenly, the cigarette dropped out of his mouth. Veldy tried to tell him that he had dropped the cigarette. As it started burning Maru's uniform, the corporal picked up the cigarette and handed it back. But with the way Maru's body bent to the side, he suddenly realized what had happened. Veldy panicked, wondering what to do. There was so much blood pouring out of Maru's body. He screamed out, begging Touri or the commander to come help, even if it was anyone at all, but there was no response, only Veldy's scream of pain. Meanwhile, the commander pressed on with his shield, protecting himself and his soldiers. He then called our protagonist, telling her that he had been shot in the left leg, and ordered her to heal him. While she did that, the commander asked Gray to cover her left side and be her meat shield. Seconds later, he asked if Touri was done. However, she complained that he was moving the wounded part too much. She couldn't focus properly. But Garbak ordered her to quickly get it over with. With tears in her eyes, she cast healing magic and tried to focus with all her might as she held on to the commander's leg. When she was done, she looked completely exhausted. But just then, Gray complained about his arm and leg, which were wounded. This only made our protagonist feel more pressured. Garbak told Gray that he had the task of protecting the trench that he had seized for all of them, and he didn't care if he died 10 minutes later. So he ordered Gray to keep running, leaving him with no choice. Garbak told Touri to gulp down the medicine because she might need to use healing magic again. He swore that as long as he lived, things would be okay one way or another. He ordered everyone to forget thinking and just follow him. Immediately afterward, Touri gulped the medicine and did her best not to throw it up. After that, her eyes sparkled, looking crazy. As they pushed on, they eventually reached the enemy's trench. Then Garbak told Gray to toss a grenade in there. Gray heeded the orders and, as he unpinned the grenade, his arm took more shots. But it didn't stop him from tossing it. Rodri complimented his nice throw. Unexpectedly, the enemy soldiers tossed the grenade right back. So, Gray quickly told Rodri to get down. Garbak then rushed toward the grenade, while Gray dived down with Rodri and Touri. He flipped through the air, ready to cut down the enemies. Immediately afterward, the explosion went off, blowing heavy dust and a shockwave that was hard for them to handle. As the dust settled, Gray, Touri, and Rodri seemed to be all right. Gray then asked Rodri to wake up, but with no response, our protagonist panicked and slapped him, causing him to wake up by force. She then told him to start moving. When he asked where the commander was, she answered that he was with the enemy. Rodri could see that commander folded those who countered the grenade. In a flash, he caught them off guard and rushed into the trench. Rodri was impressed by how strong the commander was. Our protagonist told him to stop being impressed and simply go to him. She also asked Gray to move faster as well. Sadly, he couldn't do that anymore because his legs had been blown apart. Seeing his condition, Touri and Rodri were left speechless. Rodri insisted he could still move. He dragged Gray, telling him that our protagonist could heal him. He didn't get why Gray was whining, but Rodri stopped once he saw how injured his arm was too. Gray told him it was okay and he should just go. Touri then decided she would carry Gray herself. While tying him up, she told Rodri to hurry to the trench and secure it. She then tossed Gray's hand over her shoulder as she tried to drag him off. He called out to her, and she suddenly realized he was too heavy. A man with a good constitution like Gray was heavy. What's more, with the added weight of the foot soldier's equipment, he weighed over 100 kilograms. Her current self was too small and weak. She felt like she should have dropped the gear first. However, Gray told her to leave it, and he thanked her anyway. Our protagonist didn't know what to say. Immediately after, Rodri signaled that it was okay for them to get into the trench. Touri thought the point was right up ahead, and now was a chance to get in while the assault had stopped. She just had to drag him into the trench. It was time to do her job, and she refused to let Gray die on her watch. Despite how heavy he was, she managed to take the first step. She told Gray that he could die 10 minutes later, but until then, she begged him to protect the trench that the commander had seized for them. He was shocked by her statement. Then she added that it was an order from a superior. Gray smiled, remarking that she really liked making men work for her. Just when they had a little bit more to go, our protagonist suddenly noticed something being tossed their way. It was a grenade, and while trying to shield both herself and Gray, she slipped. The grenade was now directly in her face. Touri's life flashed through her eyes, as she thought this was how easily she would die. She hated herself. Herself, who even though it was in a game, took killing people lightly. Because of her easygoing way back then, she was also foolish in this life. She wanted to end herself, who was like that. and she regretted ever becoming a soldier. If our protagonist got the chance to be reborn again, she wanted to live a simple life in a world without war. At that moment, Rodri grabbed the grenade, and she was shocked upon seeing this. He remarked that this was a nice thing the enemy had given them, and he thanked them as he threw it right back at the enemy. Immediately after, it exploded on impact, and Rodri was happy with his killing bomb. Meanwhile, Touri and Gray were bewildered. Gray asked Touri to heal his leg, or what was left of it, while she could, and she immediately complied. On the other hand, Rodri was fired up, asking for more enemies so he could kill all of them. At that moment, the commander returned, and he immediately asked Gray if he could defend the position, to which the wounded soldier replied that he could, provided that the gun was fixed in place. After hearing that, he said that it was good before ordering Touri to provide only the minimum necessary aid to prolong Gray's life, to which our protagonist quickly agreed while thinking that she knew the commander would say that. Right after, Rodri asked him what he should do, and the commander looked surprised after realizing that the kid was alive. Still, the man quickly ordered Rodri to protect that place together with Gray, and the other complied. At that moment, Touri said that the left forearm and left thigh had serious ruptures of the blood vessels, so they needed to cauterize the wounds with a burner, to which Gray replied, with a resigned expression, that it sounded painful. Almost immediately, Rodri interrupted them by scolding them for wasting time, before telling Touri to use her healing magic to fix Gray like she always did. However, Gray quickly told the kid to mind his own business and continue standing watch. Shortly after, Touri began the cauterization process, and almost immediately, it was obvious how painful it was. Even Rodri's expression changed into a fearful one after a while. Time passed, and Rodri couldn't withstand what he was seeing, so he asked Touri why she was not using healing magic, and our protagonist replied that she only had one use of heal left, and she should save that last use for healing the commander. Gray then confirmed that to Rodri, and the kid finally understood why Touri had previously told him that she was the commander's first aid kit. At that moment, our protagonist finally finished cauterizing the wound, and Gray quickly thanked her. The man then asked Touri to fix the gun between some sandbags, before warning her to be careful since the weapon was heavy. Shortly after, our protagonist finished doing it, and he thanked her before asking her to hide behind him. A while later, Rodri asked what would happen if the commander had already killed all the enemies, to which our protagonist replied by asking the kid why he was so eager to kill people. After hearing the question, Rodri simply said that he just hated the enemy, which should be obvious to her. The kid then asked her if she had someone important to her who had been killed by them, and she immediately replied that her parents and a fellow soldier. After hearing that, the kid asked her if that was not enough as a reason for killing the enemy. He then immediately added that if you didn't have a reason to destroy the enemy, you would just hesitate at a critical moment and lose your life. Gray then smiled at the kid and even praised him, to which Rodri simply replied that his previous squad leader had told him that, before adding that his former leader was much cooler and more reliable than his new comrades. In fact, all his previous comrades were better than the new ones, according to Rodri. At that moment, the commander returned, and he immediately began to undress without saying a word, and while ignoring Rodri, who had become elated after seeing the man return. As for Touri, the commander's behavior made her ask him what was happening, but almost immediately, he removed his shirt and showed her that he had been shot in the stomach. That, of course, shocked everyone, especially due to the way in which he said it. He was like he was reporting the weather. Then, our protagonist noticed that the commander had not been shot in the stomach but the liver instead, and he quickly confirmed it before ordering her to heal him. As for Rodri, he couldn't believe he had been able to keep walking while in that state. Then, our protagonist freaked out and said that the commander needed emergency surgery and that she needed an assistant. Almost immediately, the commander ordered Rodri to be Touri's assistant and to follow her instructions, which shocked him. However, before he could even react, our protagonist began to give him orders. She first asked him to disinfect his hands with alcohol before putting on gloves. She then gave him a little bottle of saline water to wash the blood out of the wound. Still, despite being terrified, the kid mustered his courage and did his best to assist our protagonist. She then used heal on the commander, and shortly after she told him that, for the most part, the minimum treatment was done with it. The man then said that he could finally get up and move with no problem, but she asked him to take a rest while thinking that the spell had exhausted all her mana. The commander put on his clothes again and said that he felt much better before adding that they could continue to push forward, which shocked our protagonist. She even mustered her courage to tell him that if he continued advancing, his condition would worsen, before proposing that they properly secure their current position and conclude that day's engagement. Sadly, the commander refused since he couldn't let that opportunity slip by. After all, that day's offensive was a once in several years occurrence. However, in an unusual turn of events, he asked Touri what she thought was needed to put an end to the war, to which she replied that it would be to seize the enemy's capital. Almost immediately, the commander told her that it was impossible to do that. He even added that it was not at all realistic to think about it. He then asked her to consider the rear before asking her what was behind them. She then said that there were medical facilities, provisions, weapons and equipment stockpiles, etc. It was then that it hit her, and the commander quickly noticed that she had realized what he was trying to convey. The man then explained that you couldn't fight if you were without food, and there was no possibility of treatment. He then added that the field hospital where she worked every day, thinking it was safe, was the most important target for an attack for frontline soldiers like them. It was then that he said that if they didn't break through that day, there was no way to tell when the following chance would arrive, which was why they were going to go as far as they could at that moment. The commander also added that the neighboring positions had already been seized, so all that was left was to wait for the friendly troops to catch up with them. At that moment, Gray began to cough, and our protagonist made the commander notice it. Shortly after, the commander said that they would withdraw since they should abandon that position, which surprised both Touri and Rodri. Afterward, the commander explained that the friendly troops had failed to conquer the third defense line, which meant that the enemy would start advancing to their current position shortly. Right after, he repeated that they should take all their stuff post-haste. Almost immediately, Rodri snapped and yelled at the commander to stop messing around with them. Still, the man ignored the kid's rant and told Gray that he should protect their backs while they were retreating, basically declaring the other's death, and Gray quickly complied. The commander then ordered Touri and Rodri to go with him, and Rodri asked what would happen to Gray, to which the man replied that Gray was their rear guard, which meant that they were going to leave him there. That shocked Touri and Rodri, and Gray simply showed a resigned expression with a half smile. Right after, Rodri asked the commander if he could carry Gray on his back as his personal meat shield, but the man denied it, which the kid didn't like. Gray then told Rodri to leave it like that, otherwise, Gray would get hit when he got back, which, of course, was a blatant lie since everyone knew Gray wouldn't return. Shortly after, Gray said that Rodri was very similar to him, and he then asked the kid if he was really close with the guys in his previous unit, which Rodri quickly confirmed. In fact, the kid was the sole survivor of that unit. Gray then said that it hit hard when the people you had grown close to were killed, to which Rodri agreed. Right after, Gray added that the kid hated his enemies so much that he wanted to slaughter them, which the kid immediately agreed to. In fact, Rodri began to feel annoyed by Gray's words, and the man immediately patted the kid's head while telling him that he knew that Rodri was lashing out with abusive words and picking fights left and right because he had thought that, since everyone was going to die anyway, it would be easier not to get attached to anyone. However, Gray then told a crying Rodri that the way of living he had chosen didn't suit him because he was too kind. After all, according to Gray, it hadn't been a coincidence that the kid had saved little Touri twice, since that was only possible if you paid close attention to what your comrades were doing. In the end, Gray said while smiling, that Rodri shouldn't hide in his shell, but stay true to himself. Almost immediately, the man hugged both Touri and Rodri while telling them that they should properly grieve for fallen friends and hold on to the strength needed to carry on. Right after, the man even thanked the commander for everything he had done, to which the other simply nodded without looking back. Damn, this one hits deep. Shortly after, it was time to leave, and the commander ordered Rodri and Touri to rush out. Rodri didn't want to go at first, but Touri dragged him and forced him to obey the orders. Almost immediately, the commander cast a spell, and Rodri yelled while crying out loud that he hated what was happening and that he was sick and tired of seeing everyone who was kind to him die. Right after, they began to retreat while looking at the enemy forces getting closer. Still, they could see and hear the moment when Gray was killed while calling to his mom. Well, at least in his last thoughts or dreams, he was able to meet with his mom again. Rest in peace. Sometime later, at a trench, Rodri and Touri was still trying to process what had happened to Gray, and the commander was called by Veldy, who yelled at the man, complaining because the commander hadn't stopped fighting once they secured the trench where they currently were. After all, no matter how you looked at it, they couldn't push through with the remaining forces. In fact, the soldier couldn't believe that the commander had used First-Class Private Gray as a sacrificial pawn. At that moment, the commander said that they could have done it if he had had 10 more people. That pissed Veldy, who told the commander that the likes of him were the worst. The kid then added that it was clearly a reckless advance, which was why the soldier doubted the commander's ability to command. In fact, the kid added that he would have to report that matter, but the commander simply pushed the soldier away while telling him that he could do as he liked. The man then began to walk away, but Veldy yelled at the man that he hadn't finished talking. At that moment, they could hear some explosions, and the commander said that it was the gun salute, before adding that it seemed that their shock assault strategy had been wildly successful, which the young soldier from before found hard to believe. The commander then explained that, looking at the results, they had been able to recapture the territory with the least number of casualties while exhausting their forces and enduring the enemy's mad attack. In fact, the man was sure that the Imperial General Headquarters would call it a flawless tactical victory. The commander then told Veldy that they were going to eat well at that night's celebration, before ordering to tell Touri and Rodri to rest in the rear. However, Veldy immediately began to cry and asked the commander how else he would call the whole operation but a defeat, before asking if he was an idiot for saying that they were going to celebrate. At that moment, they were interrupted by Touri, who asked the commander to immediately go to the hospital, but the man refused by saying that there was no need and that they should just drink, to which our protagonist objected. Obviously, the commander didn't like that, but she didn't back down and explain that his liver was ruptured, so even though she had performed emergency treatment, his condition was by no means stable. After hearing that, he finally understood and complied, and almost immediately, Touri told Corporal Veldy that his wounds could reopen if he didn't calm down, which was why he should visit the hospital as soon as possible. Veldy understood, but he first wanted to hear the details of the situation from both Touri and Rodri regarding the damage sustained and the remaining bullets at the time the commander issued his order to advance. Moreover, Veldy also wanted to know what the last words of First-Class Private Gray were. Right after, Veldy started crying and apologized to Touri and Rodri because, due to his inability to take action, he had ended up putting both of them in a dangerous situation. After all, if he had been able to persuade the commander to stop at the second position, Messrs. Muru and Gray wouldn't have died. Veldy believed that he should at least tell everything to the higher-ups. At that moment, he was interrupted by Rodri, who said that someone had been amazing, and Veldy quickly asked the boy if he could elaborate. Rodri then replied that he had been astounding until the very end. Right after, Rodri stood up and walked toward Veldy while saying that Gray had resigned himself to death and had thanked the commander. Almost immediately, Rodri began to shake Veldy by his shoulders, ignoring that the other was hurting, while saying that Gray was smiling until the very end. Afterward, Rodri added that Gray readily accepted Commander Garbak's order to cover their retreat. The boy even said that Gray had fought without thinking about his own life. So, in the end, Rodri, who was crying while resting his head on Veldy's chest, couldn't describe it other than it had been something amazing. Right after, Rodri yelled at Veldy that he should make sure he didn't file a misleading report that would besmirch Gray's honor. After all, the boy wouldn't allow Veldy to insult Gray's resolve. At that moment, Touri intervened and said that she agreed with Rodri. She then got closer to Rodri and asked him to calm down since the corporal was not the boy's enemy. Our protagonist then asked Veldy to forgive Rodri's rudeness, since the boy was just tired. She then added that she was exhausted as well, and asked Veldy if he could wait a little while before submitting his report, to which the corporal agreed. Immediately thereafter, Touri said the corporal needed to be escorted to the hospital and asked Rodri to accompany him. Rodri quickly agreed, since he believed that Gray would have done the same in the current situation. Almost immediately, our protagonist bowed to Rodri while thanking him for saving her from danger once again. She then gave him a cute smile and added that the boy had also been amazing. Rodri didn't know how to react at first, but he quickly assumed his tsundere mode and replied that she didn't need to thank him for every little thing before leaving the place with Veldy. Once she was left alone, she sat on the ground and told herself that it was right to do it at that moment since no one was looking. She then buried her face in her knees while recalling the words Gray had previously told her about how envious he was that she could make different faces, or how the day would soon come when she would envy those who had died. Our protagonist then told herself that Gray had been killed, and she still couldn't see herself as a happy person. Right after, she recalled Gray's last words to both her and Rodri about properly grieving for fallen friends and holding on to the strength needed to carry on. Touri then kept crying while thinking that, because Gray had told her, she wanted to mourn the fallen while she had the chance. Wow, this is truly depressing. Several months later, our protagonist was working at the hospital and asked a patient to take his medicine and stay healthy, to which the patient replied, thanking her. Luckily, that was the last patient for the day, and almost immediately Gale arrived and, after praising our protagonist for her good work, told Touri she could go take an Essen break. Sometime later, Gale, Touri, and a young man were eating some snacks, and Gale said that she hoped the current situation would lead them to the end of the war, to which the young man replied that he was almost at the end of his service, so either way, he would be kissing that hell goodbye. Well, you had just raised a huge death flag, my friend. Since that last battle, Sabathian troops had established a strong defensive position and had shown no signs of advancing. In fact, the entire length of the front line had become an eerie wasteland. Due to that, speculation was flying among the soldiers that both countries were secretly proceeding with the peace talks. Of course, as a foot soldier, our protagonist had no way of knowing the truth, and she could only pray that the rumors proved to be true. At that moment, she was pulled out of her reverie by the young man, who showed her a picture of his little daughter. Gale saw the picture too and said that the girl was very cute, while our protagonist asked him if he was married. The young man then replied that his daughter was 5 years old, before starting to cry while wondering out loud if she had forgotten his face. After all, it had already been 3 years. Yeah, this dude is not going to survive for much longer. Almost immediately, a smiling Gale replied that it was fine, before advising him to get her as many presents as he could. Our protagonist then told him that she was very envious since the young man was going to return to his hometown. After hearing that, Gale recalled that Touri had volunteered, which meant that she didn't have an end date for her military service. Right after, the young man began to beg Gale to enlist our protagonist in the medical corps, to which she replied, while looking upset, that she had tried before, adding that she had been denied again. Gale then explained that since Touri was quite outstanding, the top brasses were discussing whether it would be beneficial to put a medic in the ace unit. At that moment, a resentful Gale said that Garback should just kick the bucket, and the young man tried to calm her down by saying that Touri was simply doing her part as a medic. Suddenly, the young man had an idea and asked our protagonist to go to their university. Right after, Gale said that it was a nice idea before adding that even after the war ended, if Touri learned and trained there, she wouldn't lack money. After hearing that, she recalled her fallen comrades and replied that if her luck held, she might do so once the war was over. Okay, the amount of flags these people are raising is just insane. Of course, that last comment damped the mood at the table, but Gale quickly said that she believed that there wouldn't be any problems that day, before telling Touri that she could go. Right after, the young man gave our protagonist various baked sweets. Touri then received the sweets with a smile while saying that she would take him up on his offer since their platoon had a growing boy. Then, while our protagonist was walking away, the young man told Gale that Touri was like a tiny mother, to which the woman replied that our protagonist was a rather puzzling girl. The young man then smiled and said that she was pretty precocious for her age, and Gale replied that sometimes being with Touri put her in a strange mood. The head doctor even dared to say that Touri might be a traveler from a distant world. Is she reading the script or something? Of course, the young man began to laugh at that comment and told Gale that it wasn't like her to say things like that. Right after, Gale simply sighed and said that she really wished the war would come to an end sooner. Meanwhile, at the General Staff of the Armed Forces of the Sabbath Federation, an important meeting was being held, and someone was saying that there were voices full of resentment shaking the very ground around them, before adding that extreme anti-war sentiments ruled the streets, leading to a worsening of the public safety with each passing day. In fact, that person was scolding another one for wanting to announce how the war was going, which would add fuel to the fire. Afterward, the man said that the people had reached their limit, but the other man had ignored the order to go on the offensive and continued hiding in his hole. Finally, the man dared the commander, whose name was Alex Evert, to share his thoughts, before adding that he had nearly twice as many troops as the enemy under his command, yet he hadn't pushed past the opposition. Nevertheless, the commander didn't lose his composure and dared to call the other man an idiot. Then, before the others could reply, the commander added that, firstly, the Southern Front was too solidly established to collapse, and secondly, if they bought enough time for the Austin Empire to use up their supplies, they could advance steadily without any problems, which was why the politicians criticizing him should rest assured. However, those politicians didn't plan to make things easier for the commander, and one of them quickly asked him if he thought that they would approve of such a slow approach. Right after, the commander told them that they could take command of the melee combat and fight with swords while prancing around his horses. Obviously, the politician didn't like that reply, but the commander kept going by saying that they should go and take a look at the hell where youngsters, who were the future of the nation, were dying gruesome deaths left and right. At that moment, an old man intervened and stopped the commander. He even dismissed Alex before declaring that Brustaff Nova would take command of the front from that moment onward. The old man then added that in half a year, Brustaff would surely bring them victory in that 10-year war of attrition. Right after, Brustaff said that there was one more person he would like to introduce to everyone, before adding that he was planning to take her with him as a staff officer and head to the front line together. That person was his own daughter, Sylph Nova. After seeing her walking toward her father, some people began to whisper that she was a genius girl who had graduated from the military academy at just 15 years old. At that moment, Brustaff revealed that the strategy he had previously shared with the old man was just a slight modification of the paper his daughter had written. At that moment, Alex snapped and yelled at Brustaff that it was not the time for his wild tales, before adding that if he used that, their motherland would fall before Austin got around to attacking. Nevertheless, Sylph cut Alex off by saying that waiting for the enemy was the epitome of carelessness. She then added that, as Sabathians, they had never faced an unwinnable battle as long as they fought like madmen possessed. She also said that the very land they were currently walking on had been attained by their ancestors' sacrifices of their flesh and blood. Finally, she told Alex that cowards who were unwilling to follow orders should be quiet and leave, which pissed the other off a lot. Almost immediately, Alex drew his sword, and everyone went on alert, thinking that he might attack the young girl. However, he stabbed himself in the belly and declared that his life was inconsequential, before demanding Sylph to get revenge for the families of all the soldiers who had lost their lives. Still, the young girl simply ignored Alex and declared that he wanted to rectify one detail. She then said that her father had said that their strategy would allow them to lead their country to victory in half a year, before stating that she just needed 1 month because 1 month was enough time for her to win. Right after, she told her father, who was crying for Alex, that they should leave since the farce had to end. Later on, Mr. Allen started a training session with Touri, and she thanked him very much. He threw an object toward her position upon seeing it. She immediately used her wind-shot magic to send the object right back. Allen commended her for her good work. He couldn't believe she'd master it in such a short time. Our protagonist thanked him for his kind words and asked him to keep throwing more. Meanwhile, she had no idea Veldy was staring at her. Commander Garback called the corporal and ordered him to stop slacking off. Veldy reloaded his gun and continued his training, but the commander couldn't hear him. Acknowledging his words, Veldy screamed louder as he shot. Then, Garback remarked that Touri had a good reaction time to throwing grenades. That was why she ordered Allen to train her. The more people who could use wind shot, the better. He then told Veldy that he had to first get his shooting posture and reload speed down. In his current state, the corporal couldn't even hit a sleeping ant. Veldy acknowledged the commander and continued with his training. At the same time, Touri also continued with her windshot train. She could easily sense a grenade while it was still in the air. Typically, a medic would never be issued a weapon. The wind gun was a magic item crafted from wood. Its lethality was almost zero by itself, but anyone with mana could use it. Its purpose on a battlefield was to intercept grenades, which was why it was used as a defensive tool. That being said, if it was used on someone up close, it had enough power to tear eardrums or throw the person off balance, so the user had to pay attention. As a result, since Allen received a new one, our protagonist was handed down the one he previously used. She continued practicing her wind shot with sharp reflexes. Touri was having a lot of fun, but Allen needed to take a breather. She quickly apologized and asked if he was all right, which he was. Still, he was rather surprised at how she kept getting bullseyes one after another. The hand grenade replica was almost the same weight as the real thing. Of course, that made it hard for him to throw. He remarked that Touri would make a surprisingly good infantryman. She didn't get what he was talking about and doubted that a small, scrawny little girl could become a soldier. However, if this continued, Alan wouldn't be the only one getting shouted at by the commander anymore. He looked so hopeful. It was quite a cruel world. Despite training so hard, the risk of being hit only increased, all thanks to that deranged commander. Immediately afterward, they heard Rodri yelling at some soldiers to quit daydreaming. He warned that if they stopped, they would die, and the enemy wouldn't wait for them. However, the two boys were visibly exhausted, seeing Rodri as a monster. These two were known as Zoid and Kelvin. They were new recruits recently assigned to the Garback unit. Both were the same age as Rodri. However, Rodri demanded that they refer to him as an instructor. He refused to give them any bathroom breaks, ordering them to run until they pissed themselves. Despite violating their human rights, he started chasing them to run laps. Staring at them, Alan wondered when Rodri became so bossy. On the other hand, Touri felt if Gray were to see this, he would certainly be delighted. Alan agreed and then decided he would give a special reward to his boy who did his best. Immediately afterward, Rodri called Touri over. He complained that the new recruits were useless and he couldn't work with them at all. So, he asked her to show them how it was done. Kelvin started making fun of our protagonist because she was so small. Regardless, she simply introduced herself while Rodri yelled at the recruits to be more respectful because she outranked both of them. Rodri then let Touri know that the usual training would suffice. Immediately afterward, Touri took the new recruits on a run. She was so far ahead of them that they couldn't believe it. Zoid questioned if she was some kind of speedster. Kelvin then tried to tell her that she didn't need to work so hard, but the distance between them only grew larger. Afterward, they went on to body training, where our protagonist was easily doing one-handed push-ups and sit-ups. Yet, Zoid and Kelvin couldn't keep up. Next was high crawl, and Touri was moving smoothly. At this point, Kelvin wondered if she was really a medic. The recruits were completely exhausted while Rodri continued berating them. Rodri mocked them, stating that even a small girl could meet the quota without breaking a sweat. However, it was actually hard for our protagonist as well, but she didn't mind. Touri then told the recruits that they were going to love the afternoon CQC and shooting training. Kelvin became thrilled and was looking forward to shooting with real guns. Our protagonist added that Commander Garback, their country's own ace, was going to provide them with instructions, but she knew these kids were about to meet their end. Later on, after the training, Kelvin and Zoid were left bruised and battered. Zoid complained about Touri being so cruel. Rodri then told him to stop crying and go eat. And the same went for Kelvin. He couldn't stand him. Afterward, he turned his attention to Touri, letting her know he would be going out for a bit. So, Veldy would be the one looking out for anyone who wanted to mess with her. After a brief silence, she asked if Alan had invited him. Rodri was startled, seeing that she knew. She remarked that he was so spirited this morning when he was taking care of and training those two recruits. Seeing him like that left a deep impression on her. Thinking about where Alan could take him in such a good mood, Rodri had an idea of what kind of place it would be. Our protagonist stared at him as he nervously said he couldn't stay a child forever. Taken after Gray, he needed to know a lot of things. Touri seemed to agree with him, which left him shocked. She smiled at him, but Rodri was looking a bit anxious. By nighttime, Rodri and Alan were welcomed by three beautiful ladies. They were blushing hard as they stared at the girls. Two of them quickly wrapped themselves around Alan, stating they wouldn't let him sleep till dawn. Meanwhile, Rodri was greeted by the third lady, who asked for his name. His eyes quickly darted to her assets before nervously introducing himself. She remarked that his name was wonderful and then introduced herself as Rosa. Alan then told Rodri to listen to whatever the lady told him. Rosa asked Rodri if there was someone he was interested in, perhaps. He noticed her armband and was shocked to find out that she was a medic. This reminded him of Touri. Rosa explained that the Frontline was a male-dominated place, and girls sometimes came from nearby towns to offer their services. She and the others did the same to earn extra money. One of them revealed she was a combat engineer. Rodri listened as Alan teased the girls, asking whose bay he would dock in today and they laughed about it. After that, Rosa asked Rodri to tell her more about himself because she wanted to get to know him. She then decided to take him somewhere else, and Rodri was always blushing hard. The others waved them goodbye as they walked out. Rosa pointed over to a tent, telling Rodri she would go in first to get ready, and then he could come in when the lights were shut off. She added that he needed to undress completely before entering because that was how things were done here. Rodri then waited for some time before going closer to the tent when the lights went off. In a flash, he took off all his clothes, trying to calm himself. As he entered, he screamed, begging Rosa to make him a man. He was all hers. But unexpectedly, he found himself in the midst of naked men. Either way, he was definitely about to become a man that night. Poor kid. Poor kid. He claimed he had gotten the wrong place. But before he could leave, they grabbed him and pulled him in. All that was left were his screams as he struggled to escape. Alan and Rosa laughed at him for being fooled. Rosa was honestly prepared to be his first experience with this kind of thing. But Alan remarked that this was a rite of passage into the Garback unit. His bill was then brought to him, and upon seeing it, he complained that prices were high these days. Afterward, Rodri ran back to the camp without his clothes as he cursed them all. He swore never to fall for such a trick again. For now, he had to find at least a pair of pants and a shirt. Rodri was shocked to find Touri sleeping while hugging his backpack. This was the worst time to be doing this. He tried dragging the backpack slowly away, hoping not to wake her up. But our protagonist woke up to see his face. She was still trying to process what was in front of her while Rodri was scared stiff, and that wasn't the only thing stiff at the time. As she stared at him more, she questioned if it was really Rodri. He explained that she got it wrong, and that he would explain everything. But first, she needed to calm down. Still holding onto his backpack, she turned her face to the side, telling him that she'd rather not do it. But as long as he didn't run afoul of the military regulations, she would try her best. However, he didn't get what she was talking about. He just wanted his backpack. Touri remarked that she was also in his debt for saving her life twice. While Rodri was still trying to get his bag, Veldy suddenly saw him and asked what he was doing there. Caught in this situation, Rodri tried to explain once more. But Kelvin saw him and quickly assumed that he was trying to get with Touri. Rodri yelled at him to shut up and go to sleep. Veldy would only listen to his story after he put on some clothes, but that was exactly what Rodri had been trying to do the whole time. Meanwhile, Touri happily went back to sleep while still clutching the backpack. Elsewhere, a large group of Sabbath soldiers was marching down from the mountain getting closer to their location, and we all know that nothing bad will happen.
One day at the trench, the soldiers were just trying to kill time by playing cards and smoking when the guard asked if one of them could switch with him. Sadly, none of them volunteered because they were in the heat of a good game. They even added that they would give him a can of tinned soybeans as compensation. The guard clicked his tongue and, a while later, began to yawn, feeling sleepy. Suddenly, he felt something, and when he looked at the battlefield, he saw a large group of enemy soldiers approaching, which frightened him. Still, he regained his composure and yelled to the others that the enemy was attacking, but unfortunately, they thought it was a prank. After seeing their reactions, the young boy insisted that he was serious and that there were a large number of them, but the others didn't believe him. Right after, he was shot in the head, right in front of them. In fact, the bullet cut off all the fingers of one hand and crushed his face, killing him on the spot. It was then that the others finally realized the attack was real and began to alert the rest of the soldiers. The soldiers in the trench couldn't believe that there hadn't been an alert, but then one of them said that there had been no magic attack. Some then began to look for the captain, who apparently was still taking a leak. Shortly after, the enemy soldiers invaded the trench and a merciless massacre began. The enemy forces slaughtered several soldiers, but eventually the defending troops managed to react and began to open fire against the intruders. One of the soldiers trying to keep the enemy at bay told another that reinforcements would arrive soon, so they had to hold out until then. Still, the enemy soldiers kept arriving, advancing, and massacring the defending troops inside the trench. Meanwhile, somewhere else, inside a special carriage of the enemy army, Sylph Nova was carefully applying nail polish, ignoring the chaos around her. While doing it, she was talking to herself, saying the key to that strategy was the attack's suddenness. Customarily, taking time and performing an assault with magic on the expected places was merely an announcement that they were going to attack that place. So, the defense troops who were lying in the frontmost trenches were expected to counterattack. Moreover, the real enemy awaited at the third defense line. On the other hand, with the magic assault, mobile hit-and-run units would move openly to the announced locations and attempt to break through at a single point after gathering their forces. So, she wondered what would happen if they launched a wide-range attack that confused the mobile units about where they should move to respond to. After all, they only needed one breach in the defense to exploit. Okay, this lady is bad business. Afterward, from that breach, they would spread out and then rush in. From that moment onward, it was obvious what they had to do. At that moment, her face contorted into a deranged, sadistic grimace as she longed for the enemy soldier's death. She then said that she hadn't gone there to wage war on the Osten soldiers, before adding that she was merely the bringer of their deaths. Right after, she stated that, like a hunter cornering a beast, unyieldingly and mercilessly, they would be slaughtered one-sidedly. So, the only thing they could do was to resign themselves to their miserable fate and serve as the cornerstone of their motherland. Ramil, is that you? I wonder how this lady will react when the finding out part of the equation reaches her. She truly desired that her troops kill, massacre, and trample the enemy soldiers because she believed that it was time to settle their long-standing grudge. In the meantime, at the medical unit, Touri, Gale, and a young guy wearing glasses were talking when Gale suddenly said something strange was going on. The trio then went to the window and saw signs of battle outside. The problem was that, according to the young guy, the battle was very close to them. Gale then ordered them to go and gather everyone and to get ready to escape at a moment's notice. After hearing that, Touri tried to say something to Gale, but Gale cut her off and asked her to quickly return to her unit. In fact, she reminded her that she couldn't leave Garbak's side, no matter what, and our protagonist agreed. Shortly after, they said their farewells, and our protagonist left the place to return to her unit. I have a bad feeling about this. Is Gale going to be all right? Our protagonist was approaching her unit and could hear soldiers discussing where to reinforce and that they should not move on their own because they had to wait for orders. The soldiers were in a state of anxiety due to the rapid loss of their allies. In fact, when Touri arrived at the trench where her unit was located, she could see that the enemy had already broken through there. Still, she kept going forward and was forced to jump and slide to avoid getting killed by an explosion. Unfortunately, although she was very close to the trench, she failed to get inside, so her squad mates yelled at her that she had to quickly jump into the trench because otherwise she would get shot. After hearing that, she made a huge effort crawling beneath the barbed wire and managed to get into the trench. Almost immediately, a fellow soldier gave our protagonist her backpack. Then, they resumed shooting at the enemy forces, and Veldy said that he had shot another enemy, before adding that he was surprised by how accurate he was. However, Rodri told him that it was to be expected to be accurate since they had a lot of targets in front of them. Right after, Allen commented that it seemed that it was true that Savat soldiers were growing on trees, to which one of the rookie ones replied by asking if the reinforcements were really coming. Nevertheless, Allen didn't reply and only told the kid that he should focus on shooting at the enemies. Allen then asked Zoid what was wrong with him before adding that it was his chance to fire live rounds. Allen even encouraged the kid to do it. However, the kid was shocked by the whole situation, and the situation got worse when the enemy soldiers surrounded their trench. It was then that some of them began to curse at their commander because they couldn't flee since they hadn't received orders to retreat. At that moment, Kelvin said that he didn't care anymore and told his squad mates that he was skedaddling out of there. He even told the others that they should also run away as soon as possible. After hearing that, his fellow soldiers tried to convince him to stay, but before they could even begin, the kid was shot multiple times by the enemy soldiers, which shocked the others. Almost immediately, the commander told his men that they had been ordered to retreat before adding that he would clear the way, so they had to move right away. The plan was simple. He would rush out, and the others would follow precisely 1 second later. He then got ready, cast a spell called Shield, and immediately thereafter, he left the trench while telling the others that it was time to go. Of course, the enemy soldiers didn't waste time opening fire when they saw the commander leaving, but the commander was faster and massacred them with ease, effectively creating a path for his troops. Right after, Touri and her squad mates left the trench and began to run like bats out of hell, doing their best to remain close to Garbak. However, one of them felt exhausted and asked the others to slow down since they were running too fast, but his fellow soldiers quickly replied that he should not talk and had to follow them as if his life depended on it instead. Unfortunately, the kid's stamina was not good, and he was beginning to be left behind. In the end, the only thing he could do was to beg the others, but none of them were willing to slow down, and shortly after, that kid was shot. At that moment, Touri began to feel warm, and when she raised her head, she realized in horror that the hospital was on fire, which shocked her. Inside, Gale was helping the injured soldiers to evacuate through a secret passage, but sadly, an enemy soldier found them, and she decided to sacrifice herself so the others could escape. I knew she was going to die. That farewell was just too ominous. Right after, a huge explosion destroyed the building, and the soldiers who were closer to Touri commented that the enemy's attack speed was abnormal before adding that they were in their rear. Shortly after, Veli asked the commander if the Austin army had lost, and a fellow soldier quickly replied by calling him stupid before adding that there was no way that could be true. As for our protagonist, she was deeply concerned because that was the first time she had seen the commander with such an agonizing expression on his face. For that reason, she had understood everything completely. The front line, held down by their army, had collapsed. The enemy's full-throttle assault was frightening, and they were extremely cruel. They even went as far as to throw our protagonist's comrades in arms into holes before burning them alive, despite their pleas for mercy. In fact, her fellow soldiers screamed like deranged beasts as they were toyed with and killed. Nevertheless, she was not sure if anyone had the right to call those acts cruel there. After all, her fellow soldiers had killed many of the enemy comrades too. In the end, their hatred was a mirror image of them. They didn't stop running, and the commander told them that they would be safe once they had escaped the enemy's encirclement, which meant that they had a long way to go and had to focus on running. Garbak kept slaughtering enemy soldiers to allow his men to pass, but suddenly one of the attacking soldiers threw a grenade at him. Almost immediately, our protagonist took out her gun and managed to deflect the grenade and send it back to them, killing them all. Afterward, Roddy began to praise her, to which she replied that since the enemy would go after the sound, they should focus on running. Moreover, the commander cautioned them against fighting back there, stating that if they paused, they would face certain death. Some time later, they finally stopped, and Garbak told them that they had to prepare to quickly run to the forest ahead, where they could hide. He then ordered Alan to take the lead. At that moment, Veldy asked why they hadn't dropped their heavy gear if they were not going to fight back, to which Garbak replied by calling him an idiot, before explaining that from that moment onward, they wouldn't be able to resupply. So, he had to remember that what they carried on their backs was their lifeline. Despite being totally exhausted, they did their best to keep advancing since the forest was very close. In fact, seeing the forest fueled their human engines as they kept repeating to themselves that they were almost there. Shortly after, they finally arrived at the forest and established an improvised camp. There, the commander ordered them to stay alert to their surroundings under the shade of the trees. And, a while later, they noticed that the enemy were finally withdrawing. After hearing that, Garbak commented that nobody wanted to die in a battle they were winning, before adding that they were going to take a 10-minute break. Almost immediately, the soldier began to eat their rations and drink water as if there were no tomorrow. Then, while the commander was smoking a cigarette, Alan reported that regarding the losses, Zoid and Kelvin had been killed, to which Garbak replied that they had done a good job since the enemy had only killed 2 of them. Right after, Touri asked the commander what they were going to do from that moment onward, and Garbak quickly replied that they would pass through the forest and head to the fortress city of Mashdale, which caught our protagonist off guard. Thanks for watching, and thanks to all of the supporters that made this video possible. If you would like to help the channel, please use the QR code in the screen. And last but not least, a super thanks to our high-ranking supporters: Arizona Gold, 1090, Fallen Stella, Joel Alvarado, Julian Hernandez, Kildrak, Hitsuka, Lucifer High-Rise, Not Omega's Foot Fungus, Pawe Jojeski, and NATO Enthusiast. Thanks, and have a nice day.